What if an entire society once flourished beneath a jungle so dense that the world forgot it ever existed? Hidden beneath tangled roots and towering trees lie the remains of people who built cities, created astonishing monuments, and then vanished without a trace. Who were they? What forced them to disappear? And what secrets are still buried beneath the forest floor waiting to rewrite human history? Before we uncover this incredible lost world, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more fascinating mysteries from humanity's forgotten past. Now let's step into the jungle and discover the lost society hidden beneath it. The jungle does not look ruined at first. It looks alive, endlessly alive, a wall of green breathing under a heavy sky with vines hanging like old ropes from trees so tall. Their crowns seem to hold the afternoon light in place. Rain gathers on leaves wider than a human chest. Insects pulse in the heat. Somewhere below the roots, beneath the damp soil and the slow work of centuries, there are lines that nature did not make. A raised path runs straight where no animal trail would choose to run straight. A low mound rises with a shape too deliberate to be a hill. A shallow ditch curves around a buried space that once mattered to people whose names have not survived. From the ground, almost nothing announces itself. A traveller could pass within a few steps of an ancient platform and see only trunks, moss, ferns, and shadow. Yet beneath this green silence lies the faint outline of a society that once knew how to build, farm, gather, remember, and endure in a world that later swallowed its evidence whole. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The trail ahead leads into a place where history is not preserved in marble or written in stone tablets, but hidden under roots, mud, charcoal, broken pottery, and the strange geometry of land seen clearly only when the forest is stripped away by imagination, excavation, or modern scanning. The lost society beneath the jungle is not a single fantasy kingdom waiting to be named with certainty. It is something more unsettling because it is more real, a human world that may have been large, organized, and deeply adapted to its environment, yet fragile enough to fade until even its roads became ridges of earth and its plazas became feeding grounds for ants. For a long time, dense tropical forests were often treated by outsiders as empty wilderness, green barriers rather than historical landscapes. The old assumption was simple and wrong in many places. Poor soils, heavy rain disease, and thick vegetation must have kept human communities small and scattered. Great societies, according to that view, belong to river valleys, dry highlands, open plains, and stone cities visible from far away. The jungle seemed too wet, too tangled, too alive to hold a buried past of any great scale. What survives in the record now suggests a different story. Across parts of the Amazon basin, Central America, Southeast Asia, and other tropical regions, archaeology has revealed earthworks, canals, reservoirs, terraces, causeways, field systems, and settlement patterns that show human beings did not merely survive in these forests. They shaped them, sometimes carefully, sometimes dramatically, and sometimes for centuries. The first mystery, then, is not simply that a society disappeared. It is that so many signs of human design could remain unseen for so long. A stone temple in a desert announces itself by resisting emptiness. A pyramid on an open plain interrupts the horizon. But a raised mound in a rainforest becomes a hill once trees grow over it. A causeway becomes a dry strip where certain plants take root. A ditch becomes a seasonal pool. A settlement becomes a pattern of slightly different vegetation, richer soil, darker earth, and broken fragments that only reveal their meaning to patient eyes. The jungle does not erase by destroying everything at once. It erases by adding life. It covers walls with roots. It folds paths into undergrowth. It turns human geometry into habitat. Somewhere in this buried world there was once an arrival. People came to a river bend a floodplain edge, a dry rise above seasonal water, or a place where forest and open ground met. They did not see an untouched paradise. They saw possibilities and dangers together. The rains could feed crops or drown them. The river could carry trade or disease. The forest could provide fruit timber animals, medicine fibers, resins, and shade. But it could also close around a settlement with astonishing speed. To build here required knowledge that did not come from theory. It required generations of observation where water stood after the rains, which soils could be improved, which trees signalled old disturbance, which plants returned after burning, which paths remained passable in the wet months, and which high ground stayed safe when floods spread like brown mirrors across the land. Over time, small choices became visible in the earth. A clearing widened. Houses stood on slightly raised ground. Refuse accumulated at the edges of living spaces. Cooking fires left charcoal. Pots cracked were discarded and sank into soil. Fields moved and returned. Useful trees were protected while others were cut. Paths were walked so often that they hardened into roots, and roots became part of memory. Children learned where food grew, where water could be found, where ancestors were buried, where ceremonies took place, and where strangers might appear from beyond the trees. No single moment made a society. It gathered itself slowly out of repeated work, shared rules, inherited habits and decisions whose makers could not have known that centuries later their traces would be read from the air. The landscape itself may have looked very different from what later explorers imagined. The forest surrounding the settlement was not necessarily a solid, untouched mass. It may have been a mosaic gardens, orchards, managed groves, fallow fields, wetlands, fish ponds, paths, ceremonial clearings and older forest patches where hunting and gathering continued. In some regions, archaeologists have found dark, fertile human-made soils, enriched through burning food, waste charcoal, bone pottery and organic matter. These soils suggest not careless occupation, but repeated investment, a long effort to make difficult ground more productive. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how widespread such practices were in different tropical societies. But one thing is increasingly hard to deny. Many ancient people understood these forests not as wilderness, outside civilization, but as living systems that could be guided. And yet the society beneath the jungle remains difficult to hold in the mind because it refuses the usual shape of a lost civilization story. There may be no single king whose name survives no inscription, declaring victory, no complete map of roads and districts, no written chronicle of foundation and collapse. Instead, there are patterns. There are mounds beneath trees. There are long straight embankments that continue under canopy until they vanish into swamp. There are fragments of pottery that suggest food storage, ritual trade, and daily hands. There are plant communities that may be descendants of ancient cultivation. There are places where the ground is too regular, too arranged, too quietly intentional. The result is a kind of archaeology of absence. The people are gone from view, but the land still behaves as though they were there. This is what makes the hidden society so haunting. It does not appear as a dead city frozen in one final day. It appears as a buried argument between nature and memory. Every root that grips an old mound seems to conceal and preserve at the same time. Every storm that washes soil from a slope may expose a shard, then bury it again. Every tree growing on an ancient platform turns disappearance into life. The jungle is not merely the destroyer of the past, it is also its keeper, though a difficult one, guarding evidence in forms that can be mistaken for accident. To enter this story is to accept uncertainty from the beginning. No single explanation fully accounts for how such societies rose, changed, and vanished from ordinary sight. Some were transformed by climate, some were disrupted by conflict or shifting trade. Some may have reorganized rather than collapsed their descendants, moving elsewhere, or living in ways less visible to archaeologists. Later, disease colonization, forced labor and violence shattered many indigenous worlds across the tropics, making the silence deeper and more painful. But beneath that silence, older histories remain. They wait in soil, water, canopy and shadow. They wait in landscapes that seem wild only because the human hands that shape them have been hidden by time. Before the forest closes over the evidence, before roots climb the platforms and rain softens the edges of old earthworks, the landscape offers a different face. It is not an empty green wall. It is a place of openings, edges, banks, ridges, channels, and seasonal rhythms. A society hidden beneath the jungle begins not with monuments, but with attention. People notice where the river slows and leaves behind fine sediment. They notice where a low rise remains dry while the surrounding flats turn to water. They notice which palms fruit in the lean months, which trees attract animals, which clay can be shaped into vessels, and which patches of ground recover quickly after fire. In such a place, settlement is never simply a matter of choosing land. It is a long negotiation with water, soil, heat, plants, insects, and time. The first communities that take root in this world do not stand apart from the forest. They live within its cycles. During the wet season, rivers expand beyond their channels and turn familiar paths into corridors of mud and reflection. Fish move into flooded forests. Canoes become more useful than walking. Low fields may drown, but raised ground becomes precious. During the dry season, water withdraws and leaves behind exposed banks, animal tracks, useful clay, and travel routes that are hidden for part of the year. The people who settle here learn that abundance is not constant. It moves. It arrives in waves, in fruiting seasons, spawning periods, storms, migrations, and brief windows when planting or burning becomes possible. Their world rewards patience more than force. This matters because the jungle is often imagined as naturally generous, a place where food simply hangs from branches, and survival requires little planning. The reality is more demanding. Tropical forests can be rich in species, and still difficult for dense human populations to inhabit without skill. Edible plants are spread unevenly. Game may be elusive. Soils can be thin, acidic, or quickly depleted when exposed. Rain can wash away nutrients as fast as people try to gather them. In many places, fertility is stored more in living vegetation than in the ground itself. To build a lasting society here, people must do more than clear trees and plant crops. They must understand how to keep fertility circulating. They must work with decay ash, compost, flood sediment, and the stubborn resilience of plants. What survives in the record suggests that ancient communities in tropical regions often answered this challenge with quiet sophistication. They did not always transform land with huge stone buildings. Sometimes they transformed it with raised fields, drainage channels, controlled burning garden forests, fish traps, managed wetlands, and darkened soils enriched over generations. A patch of unusually fertile earth can be as important as a wall. A line of useful trees can be as historical as a road. A mound that lifts a house above seasonal floodwater can tell a story of adaptation as clearly as a carved monument. Scholars still debate the scale and timing of these practices in different regions, but the broader lesson is clear: the forest that later appears to have swallowed a society may in earlier centuries have been partly shaped by that society's own hands. The place where the hidden society forms is likely chosen for connection as much as for safety. Rivers are the natural roads of the jungle. They carry fish, silt, driftwood, people, stories, and danger. A settlement near water can feed itself, travel, exchange goods, and communicate with other communities far beyond the nearest stand of trees. A bend in a river may become a meeting place. A confluence may become a centre of exchange. A dry terrace above a floodplain may become valuable because it offers access without drowning. Over many years, trails lead away from the water into the forest, linking gardens, hunting grounds, clay sources, ritual places, and neighbouring settlements. From above, centuries later, some of those routes may appear as straightened lines beneath the canopy, but from the ground they begin as footsteps repeated until memory hardens into geography. There is a lesser-known truth hidden in such landscapes. Forests can remember disturbance. Certain useful species may cluster near old habitation zones long after houses vanish. Fruit trees, palms, nut-bearing trees, and plants favoured by people can survive, spread, and reproduce in patterns that are not random. The evidence is not always easy to interpret because animals also move seeds. Rivers rearrange banks and forests change for many reasons. Still, in some tropical regions, researchers have argued that the modern distribution of useful plants may preserve traces of ancient management. The jungle in this sense is not simply growing over history. It may be growing out of history. Some of its abundance may be an inheritance from people who planted, protected, burned, selected, and returned. The earlier settlement is probably modest. Houses are built from materials that do not last well in wet heat. Wood, thatch, palm, fibre, earth, and reed. A roof must shed heavy rain. A floor must stay above mud. A hearth must remain dry enough to keep fire alive. Smoke helps keep insects away, though never completely. Food must be stored where animals cannot easily reach it. Tools must be repaired constantly. Paths must be cleared again and again because the forest is always attempting to reclaim any opening. This is not the dramatic labour of one great construction project, but the persistent labour of ordinary survival. It is the kind of work that rarely leaves a clean monument, and yet makes all later complexity possible. As families return to the same favourable places, the settlement becomes layered. Old house floors leave stains in the soil. Broken pots collect in refuse areas. Charcoal accumulates where fires are lit season after season. Burials may mark certain spaces as belonging to ancestors. A clearing that once holds a few households grows into a more stable community. Nearby trees are chosen and tended. Gardens become more predictable. Small earthworks help control runoff. A mound is raised a little higher after a bad flood. A ditch is widened after a season of standing water. At first, these modifications may seem practical, almost invisible. Over generations, they begin to create a human-shaped landscape. The society's rise depends on one of the most powerful but least spectacular forces in history: reliability. A community grows when it can produce enough food, often enough, store enough surplus to survive. Bad months settle disputes without constant fragmentation, and maintain trust across households. In the jungle, reliability is never given freely. It must be built into the land. Raised fields reduce the danger of waterlogged crops. Tree crops spread risk across seasons. Fishing supplements farming when gardens fail. Hunting and gathering remain part of the economy, not as primitive leftovers, but as flexible strategies. A society that seems hidden beneath forest may have endured precisely because it never depended on only one kind of food, one kind of field, or one narrow idea of civilization. As the settlement expands, the world around it changes in ways that a person living there may not think of as environmental transformation. A child born into the community sees paths, gardens, managed groves, and water channels as normal parts of the landscape. The elders remember when some clearings were smaller, when a mound had not yet been raised, when a canal had not yet been dug, when a neighbouring group first began to visit regularly. Stories attach themselves to certain trees, certain turns in the river, certain patches of dark earth. The community is no longer simply living in a forest. It is living in a known world, a world of named places and remembered labour. Yet this formation carries a quiet tension from the start. The very conditions that make the place attractive can also make it vulnerable. Rivers that connect can flood. Fertile edges can shift. Abundant forest can conceal enemies or strangers. Soils improved by patient work can be damaged by overuse. A society that succeeds may draw more people, and more people require more food, more coordination, more authority, more clearing, more rules. No single problem appears at the beginning as destiny. The evidence remains incomplete, and it would be too simple to imagine collapse already written into the first settlement. But the seeds of later trouble often lie inside early success. A community learns to guide water, and then becomes dependent on that guidance. It builds on raised ground, and then needs more raised ground. It creates paths, and those paths bring exchange, influence, and risk. For now, though, the society is not lost. It is becoming visible in the habits of the living. Fires burn under shelter while rain drums on leaves. Canoes slide along brown water between walls of vegetation. People carry baskets of roots, fruits, fish, clay, and wood. Smoke rises through gaps in the canopy. Children learn the difference between ordinary forest and places made useful by generations. The jungle around them is not an enemy, not yet a tomb, and not an untouched wilderness. It is a partner that gives and takes according to rules no one fully controls. In that partnership, the first outlines of the hidden society appear faint at first, then stronger, until the land itself begins to remember human intention. The society takes shape not in a single burst of ambition, but through the slow thickening of relationships. A few households become many. A clearing becomes a place people return to not only because food grows there, but because obligations gather there. Paths that once lead only to gardens begin to lead toward neighbours, kin, ceremonial spaces, storage areas, and places where the dead are remembered. The landscape is no longer a collection of useful spots. It becomes arranged. There are spaces for living spaces, for working spaces, for gathering spaces that are ordinary, and spaces that carry a weight no one needs to explain aloud. The jungle still presses close on every side, but within it the people create a pattern, and the pattern begins to look like society. At first the signs are humble. Houses stand on platforms raised just high enough to avoid the worst of the mud. The platforms may be repaired after each wet season, their edges renewed with baskets of soil, clay, shell ash, or refuse. Around them, swept areas keep snakes, insects, and rot at a distance, at least in theory. Cooking fires are placed where smoke can rise through gaps in the roof. Storage baskets hang above damp floors. Dogs may sleep near thresholds. Tools made from stone bone shell or hardened wood move from hand to hand until they wear smooth. None of this would impress a later empire measuring greatness in carved stone and permanent walls, but permanence is not always the first language of civilization. In a wet forest, survival often depends on forms that can be repaired, moved, replaced, and renewed. As the community grows, the settlement becomes less casual. A path is widened because more people use it. A mound is enlarged because a household gains importance, or because the ground beneath it must rise above repeated flooding. A central open space begins to matter. People gather there for exchange labour ceremonies, conflict resolution, or seasonal events that bind scattered households into a larger identity. The open area may not be paved. It may not be bordered by carved monuments. yet it changes the social world around it. A plaza, even a simple earthen one, creates a place where people can see and be seen. It turns private families into a public community. It gives memory a stage. The evidence for such places often arrives in fragments. Archaeologists may find compacted surfaces beneath later soil post holes, marking former buildings, concentrations of pottery, patches of burned earth, and the faint outlines of ditches or embankments. These remains can seem modest until they are mapped together. One mound is just a mound. A line of mounds around an open space suggests planning. A path linking one cluster to another suggests movement with purpose. A network of raised roots fields and habitation zones suggests a society capable of cooperation beyond the household. Scholars still debate how centralized some jungle societies were, and the evidence remains incomplete in many regions, but the idea of small, isolated families living in timeless wilderness no longer fits what survives in the ground. In some hidden settlements, earth becomes the main building material because earth is everywhere and stone is not. Soil is cut, carried, packed, shaped, and reshaped. Ditches may mark boundaries, drain water, or hold ritual meaning. Embankments may guide movement, protect spaces, or announce control over land. Platforms lift homes, temples, storehouses, or elite residences above wet ground. Causeways connect places that would otherwise be separated by mud, seasonal flooding, or dense vegetation. To a person walking through the forest centuries later, these features may look natural, softened by erosion and roots. But when viewed from above or traced carefully across the ground, they reveal an old insistence on order. That order does not require a state in the familiar sense. It may belong to a chiefdom, a federation of villages, a ritual landscape, a network of kin groups, or a form of political life that does not match the categories later historians prefer. No single explanation fully accounts for the variety of societies that formed under tropical canopies. Some may have been relatively egalitarian for long periods. Others clearly developed hierarchies with certain households controlling labor, ceremony exchange, or access to sacred knowledge. Prestige may have been shown through feasts, ornaments, exotic goods, burial treatment, or the ability to mobilize people for construction. Power could be visible in a raised platform, but it could also reside in memory, ancestry, ritual timing, agricultural knowledge, or control of roots. Food remains at the center of this growth. A society cannot become complex on mystery alone. It needs dependable calories, and in the jungle, dependability usually comes from diversity. Gardens produce roots, tubers maize in some regions, squash beans, peppers fruits, or other crops depending on place and period. Managed trees offer nuts, palms, fruits, oils, fibers, resins, and shade. Rivers and wetlands provide fish, turtles, mollusks, waterfowl, and plants that thrive in flooded environments. Hunting adds meat, but rarely as a simple foundation for large populations. The most resilient communities likely spread risk across many food sources, so that failure in one area does not mean disaster everywhere. What survives in the record suggests that some societies understood this balance with remarkable care. There is surprising detail in many tropical archaeological landscapes. The most important architecture may be nearly invisible until measured. A low ridge can be a road. A shallow depression can be part of a drainage system. A patch of dark soil can be a centuries-old archive of cooking, burning, disposal, and renewal. A cluster of useful trees can be a living descendant of an ancient orchard. Such evidence asks for a different kind of imagination. It does not invite the eye to admire a surviving palace. It asks the mind to reconstruct repeated acts carrying soil in baskets, clearing regrowth with stone or wooden tools, repairing a roof before the rains, planting cuttings, maintaining a canal, burning brush at the right time, walking the same route until it becomes a line in the earth. As paths lengthen and settlements connect, exchange deepens the society's shape. Goods move through the forest and along waterways. Some are practical saltstone clay fibers, resins, food pigments, feathers, shells, medicinal plants. Others carry status or sacred meaning. A bead from far away can prove that the community is not isolated. A stone tool made from non-local material can reveal links across great distances. A style of pottery can show influence, imitation, migration, or shared ritual practice. The jungle may seem to hide people from one another, but rivers and trails often make it a connected world. News travels. Marriages link communities. Ceremonies draw visitors. Conflicts move along the same routes as trade. With connection comes identity. The people of this society may begin to distinguish themselves from neighbours through pottery styles, burial customs, house forms, body ornaments, food practices, ceremonial calendars, or the layout of their settlements. They may remember origin stories tied to a river, a hill, a grove, a flood, or an ancestor whose presence anchors the community to the land. They may build not only for practical need, but to make belonging visible. A platform can say that a lineage has been here a long time. A plaza can say that scattered households are one people at certain moments of the year. A causeway can say that movement itself has been organized. A boundary ditch can say that some spaces are inside and others are outside. Ritual spaces emerge within this arranged world, though their meanings are often the hardest to recover. A mound may support a communal building. A cleared area may align with seasonal events, though claims about astronomical precision must be handled carefully, because not every alignment is intentional, and not every pattern is proof. Offerings may be placed in pits, vessels may be broken deliberately. Pigments may mark bodies or objects, and the dead may be buried in ways that bind ancestors to the settlement. The evidence remains incomplete, especially where wet soil destroys organic materials, but ritual leaves traces in repetition. When people return to the same place to burn, bury, deposit, build, or gather, the land accumulates meaning. The society is now more than a settlement hidden in green. It is a human arrangement of labour, memory, authority, subsistence, and belief. It has a centre, perhaps several centres. It has roots that draw people inward and outward. It has households that depend on one another and may also compete with one another. It has specialists, or at least people known for particular skills, potters, builders, healers, canoe makers, ritual leaders, farmers with deep knowledge of soils and seasons. It has old people who remember past floods and young people who inherit fields they did not create. It has rules that are enforced not by written law, perhaps, but by kinship, reputation, ceremony, obligation, and the difficult practical fact that no one survives alone for long in such a place. Still, everything remains vulnerable to the living force around it. The same forest that provides materials also decays them. The same rain that feeds crops threatens foundations. The same rivers that connect communities can isolate them overnight when floods rise. This is the quiet tension beneath the society's formation. It has learned to shape the jungle, but not to conquer it. It has created a built world whose greatest works may be earthen, wooden, woven, planted, and therefore perishable. It is becoming strong in a way that later observers may struggle to see. Its strength lies not in resisting nature completely, but in weaving human life into natural cycles closely enough that once the people are gone, the weave can be mistaken for forest. By the time the society reaches its fullest early shape, a stranger entering from the river would not find a random scattering of huts. The stranger would see signs of order, a landing place worn by canoes, A path rising from the water gardens arranged around homes, smoke lifting from roofs, mounds kept clear, people moving with baskets and tools, children playing near spaces where adults gather, and beyond all of it, the dark edge of forest waiting. The settlement would carry the sound of work and ritual, the smell of damp earth and cooking fires, the tension of human ambition under a canopy that never stops growing. The lost society is not yet lost. It is awake, organized, and confident enough to leave its signature in the land, even if that signature will one day require lasers, maps, and patient excavation to read. The hidden society survives because it learns that the jungle cannot be treated as empty space waiting to be cleared. It must be read like a living machine, one that changes shape with rain, heat decay, river movement, animal paths, and the invisible work of roots. Every practical decision carries consequences. Cut too much forest and the soil may weaken. Leave too much shade and certain crops fail. Build too low and water enters the house. Build too high and labour must be drawn from fields, fishing, hunting and repair. The people who live here do not need a written manual to understand this. They inherit knowledge through repetition, season after season, until engineering becomes less a separate profession than a shared way of noticing the land. Water is the first problem and the first opportunity. In the dry months it withdraws into channels, ponds, shaded hollows and deeper river bends. In the wet months it comes from everywhere. It falls through the canopy, runs down trunks, gathers in footprints, fills ditches, spreads through wetlands, and turns low ground into a shining, unstable world. A community that hopes to remain in place must decide where water should move and where it must not. This is where the earliest earthworks become more than simple mounds. A raised platform is not only a place to build a house, it is a statement about flood levels remembered from past years. A drainage ditch is not only a cut in the soil, it is a way of buying time during a storm. A canal is not merely a channel, it can be a road, a boundary, a fish trap, a water source, or all of these at once. In many tropical archaeological landscapes, the surviving evidence suggests that ancient communities engineered with earth, because earth was the material most available and most obedient to repeated labour. Soil could be dug with simple tools carried in baskets packed underfoot, reinforced with vegetation, and repaired after damage. Such work may seem modest beside stone architecture, but in a wet forest it can be astonishingly effective. Raised fields lift crops above saturated ground. Channels drain excess water while sometimes holding fish or aquatic plants. Embankments keep paths usable when the surrounding soil becomes mud. Reservoirs or modified ponds preserve water when rains fail. Scholars still debate how many of these features were built for farming, transport, defense ritual, or several purposes together, but their presence shows careful planning in places once dismissed as too difficult for dense settlement. The engineering is often low-browed and patient. It does not always rise dramatically toward the sky. It stretches across ground. It organizes movement. A causeway may pass through forest over seasonal wetlands or between settlement clusters raised just enough to keep feet above water and to mark a dependable route. In the wet season, when ordinary trails dissolve, such a road becomes a line of survival. People can carry food, can attend ceremonies, move tools and maintain alliances. The causeway also changes the mind. Once a route is built, the places it connects seem closer, more related, more clearly part of one world. Engineering is not only about solving physical problems, it reshapes social distance. Farming beneath the canopy requires equal subtlety. The forest does not surrender easily to fields, and the people likely avoid relying on a single method. Some crops grow in garden plots near houses, where food waste ash and daily attention enrich the soil. Others grow in more open areas, rotated or left fallow after use. Wetland edges may support raised fields, while drier rises carry tree crops or mixed gardens. In some regions, ancient people appear to have built soils over long periods, creating dark, fertile patches that retain charcoal and organic matter. These human-enriched soils are a lesser-known clue to the depth of occupation. They are not monuments in the ordinary sense, yet they can outlast houses, names, and political systems. A field can disappear from sight while its soil continues to remember the hands that improved it. Fire is another tool, dangerous but powerful. Controlled burning can clear undergrowth, return nutrients to the surface, reduce pests, open patches for planting, and maintain certain kinds of vegetation. Uncontrolled fire can ruin everything. In humid forests, fire behaves differently than in dry grasslands. But during seasonal dryness or in disturbed areas, it can still transform the land. The people must know when to burn, how much to burn, and when not to risk it. What survives in the record often appears as charcoal, small black fragments that seem simple until they are dated, mapped, and connected to human activity. Charcoal can mark cooking, clearing, craft production, ritual deposits, or accidental destruction. The evidence remains incomplete, and it is rarely possible to read a whole human intention from a burned fragment, but charcoal is one of the ways the hidden society speaks after its voice has vanished. Construction itself depends on materials that decay. Wood, palm, thatch vines, bark, clay reeds, and fibres make up much of the built environment. These materials are not failures, they are sensible choices. A thatched roof breathes in heavy heat. Wooden posts can be replaced. Woven walls can be repaired. Palm leaves shed rain and can be renewed as they rot. A society in the jungle may build for maintenance rather than eternity. This makes it easy for later observers to underestimate it. Stone ruins seem grand because they survive as ruins. Wooden cities may vanish almost completely, leaving only post holes, stains, burnt patches, and altered ground. The absence of towering remains does not mean the absence of organization. It often means the builders chose materials suited to life rather than to future archaeology. The same practical intelligence shapes movement. Rivers carry people farther than footpaths can, especially when the forest is thick and the land is wet. Canoes become extensions of the settlement. They connect fields, fishing grounds, clay deposits, trading partners, and distant communities. A landing place worn smooth by use may become as important as a gate. During floods, canoe routes shift into the forest itself, passing between trunks above ground that is normally dry enough to walk. During low water, people drag boats, repair banks, or follow exposed paths. Life here is amphibious in rhythm, even when the society is not literally built on water. Travel depends on reading currents, snags, sandbars, flood marks, and the moods of rivers that can change after one night of rain. Engineering also reaches into food capture. Fish weirs, traps, ponds, channels, and seasonal barriers can turn water into storage. Instead of chasing fish only in open rivers, people can guide them, hold them, harvest them when needed, and combine fishing with farming. Wetlands are not wastelands in this world. They are productive zones if understood properly. Turtles, mollusks, reeds, water plants, birds, and fish may all support settlement. A ditch cut for drainage can become habitat. A canal made for travel can also bring food. Such overlapping uses make tropical engineering difficult to classify. Later maps may label a feature as agricultural or ceremonial, defensive or practical, but ancient people may have built without respecting those modern divisions. A channel could serve the stomach, the canoe, the boundary and the ritual calendar all at once. These societies' builders also pay attention to height. In flat jungle landscapes, even a small rise matters. A difference of 1 or 2 meters can decide whether a house remains dry, whether stored food survives, whether insects gather, whether a corpse can be buried safely, whether a ceremonial place remains usable during rains. Mounds may grow slowly from repeated rebuilding rather than from one grand command. Still, at some point the act of raising ground becomes social. People must cooperate to move soil. They must decide whose house stands higher, which spaces deserve the most labour, which platforms are renewed first after erosion, and which old places are abandoned. Engineering becomes politics, though not always in an obvious way. There is a quiet contradiction in this society's achievements. Its most important works are designed to blend with the land over time. A raised field becomes a low ridge covered in grass or trees. A platform becomes a mound. A canal becomes a wet hollow. A managed grove becomes forest. A path becomes a line of different plants. The very success of adapting to the jungle makes the built world easier for the jungle to reclaim. No single explanation fully accounts for why these places later become hidden, but their materials and methods help explain why disappearance can happen so thoroughly. They are not built to resist the forest forever. They are built to function inside it. Yet during the society's living years there is nothing ghostly about this engineering. It is daily audible and physical. People cut poles, carry soil patch roofs, clear drainage channels, weed gardens, repair canoe landings, burn brush, dig clay, shape vessels, and walk the raised paths after rain. Children see adults checking water levels and learn that a ditch is not just a ditch, but a safeguard. Elders remember floods that reach certain trees and warn against building too low. Skilled workers know which wood lasts longest in damp ground, which palm leaves make the best roof, and which clay cracks in firing. The society's genius is not hidden from itself. It is only hidden from those who arrive later expecting civilization to look like stone. As the settlement becomes more elaborate, the forest around it becomes more human without ceasing to be forest. Some trees are spared because they feed people, some are planted near homes, some are cut to open light. Paths follow routes of labour and memory. Water moves through channels shaped by hands. Soil grows darker where generations cook, discard, burn and rebuild. The hidden society is now engineering a world that future centuries will misread as nature alone. Beneath the canopy order is spreading not as a rigid grid imposed from outside, but as a flexible arrangement built from observation. The jungle remains powerful, unpredictable, and never fully controlled. Still, for a time, human knowledge and green abundance hold together, and the society hidden beneath the leaves becomes one of the most difficult kinds of civilization to recognize, a civilization built partly out of living things. Behind every mound-ditch path and darkened patch of earth there is a life that cannot be fully reconstructed, but should not be reduced to ruins. The hidden society is not made only by builders, farmers or leaders. It is made by people waking before the heat becomes heavy, by hands reaching for baskets and tools, by smoke rising from damp hearths, by children learning which plants can cut skin, and which fruits are safe only when ripe, by elders watching cloud colour and river height, with the calm suspicion of those who have seen seasons betray expectation. What survives in the record suggests organisation, but organisation begins in ordinary days. The buried settlement once has smell, sound, fatigue, hunger, laughter, sickness, skill, memory, and the constant pressure of work that must be done again tomorrow. Morning begins unevenly across the community. In houses raised above wet ground, sleepers stir under roofs of palm or thatch while the forest is still dim. The air is already warm. Smoke from banked fires curls upward and keeps some insects away, though never enough. People check stored food, look at the sky and listen for rain. Some go toward gardens carrying digging sticks, stone blades, baskets, or bundles of cuttings. Others head toward water with nets, traps, hooks, spears, or woven containers. A few remain near the houses to repair tools, tend children, prepare food, scrape fibers, shape clay, or watch over the old and sick. The division of labor may follow age, gender, status, skill, ritual, obligation, and season, but it is unlikely to be rigid in every circumstance. In a demanding environment, survival often requires flexibility, and a person's worth may depend as much on practical competence as on inherited position. Food preparation occupies a large part of life. Roots must be dug, cleaned, grated, soaked, roasted, boiled, or otherwise processed depending on the crop. Some plants are nourishing only after careful preparation, and mistakes can be dangerous. Fish must be cleaned quickly in the heat. Meat must be smoked, cooked, shared, or preserved before it spoils. Fruits ripen in bursts, creating brief periods of abundance followed by leaner days. Nuts and seeds require cracking, grinding, roasting, or storage. Pottery matters here not as decoration alone, but as technology. A clay vessel allows boiling, storing, fermenting, serving, and carrying. When a pot breaks, it does not simply vanish from usefulness. Its fragments may line hearths, support cooking, become temper for new clay, or sink into the soil as one of the most durable signatures of domestic life. The people behind the ruins know the forest through bodies as much as through ideas. Feet learn where roots rise under leaves. Hands learn bark texture, fiber strength, clay moisture, and the weight of a full basket. Eyes learn small differences in green that outsiders might miss. A useful tree is not just a tree. It is fruit in one season, shade in another, medicine in another, perhaps a landmark, perhaps a memory of someone who planted or protected it. A bend in a path may be associated with a family, a warning, a burial, a story, or an old accident that has become part of local knowledge. The settlement is filled with such meanings, most of which leave no direct trace. Archaeology finds the pot, the pit, the mound, the seed, the bone, the charcoal. It rarely finds the hesitation before a storm or the quiet pride of a well-made canoe. Children grow inside this knowledge. They do not learn the landscape from maps. They learn by following, carrying, watching, imitating, and being corrected. They learn which insects to avoid, which sounds mean rain, which mud will hold a footprint, which house belongs to which relatives, which spaces are not to be entered casually, and which old stories explain why a mound, a grove, or a water place matters. Their play likely mirrors adult work. Small baskets, miniature tools, pretend cooking, running along paths, practicing balance near canoe landings. Some children die young, as in most ancient societies, from disease, accident, malnutrition, parasites, infection, or complications that leave little visible evidence unless bones survive. The warmth of daily life exists beside a familiarity with loss. The evidence remains incomplete, especially in acidic soils that destroy human remains, but no ancient community is free from grief. Older people hold a different kind of power. In societies without extensive writing, memory is infrastructure. Elders may remember land boundaries, marriage ties, old disputes, flood levels, failed harvests, ritual sequences, plant uses, and the names of the dead. Their authority may not always be formal, but it can be decisive. A leader who commands labor still depends on people who know when to plant, where to dig, which path remains passable, and which neighboring community has become dangerous or generous. What survives in the record suggests that political power in such societies may have been distributed through households, lineages, ritual specialists, and practical experts, rather than concentrated only in monumental rulers. Scholars still debate the details, but daily life almost certainly depends on overlapping forms of authority, Ritual does not stand apart from work. It moves through planting, harvesting, building, healing, burial, feasting, and the maintenance of social bonds. A mound may be a practical platform and also a place connected to ancestry. A feast may distribute surplus food and also confirm rank. A burial may express affection, obligation, lineage, and claim to land. Objects placed in the ground may seem mysterious later because their meanings are not written beside them. A broken vessel might be ordinary trash, but it might also be a deliberate offering. Charcoal might come from dinner or ceremony. Red pigment might mark decoration status, mourning, healing, or belief. No single explanation fully accounts for every deposit, and careful interpretation requires humility. Still, repetition reveals that these people invest certain places with more than practical value. Trade and contact bring the wider world into the settlement. A shell from a distant coast, a stone not found locally, a distinctive pigment or a pottery style resembling another region, can show that the hidden society is not sealed away by vegetation. Rivers, portages, and forest paths allow goods and ideas to move sometimes slowly, sometimes across surprising distances. Visitors may arrive by canoe with food ornaments, news, marriage proposals, ritual invitations, warnings or demands. Some are welcomed, some are watched carefully. Exchange is never only economic, it creates obligations. A gift may require a future return. A feast may build alliance. A marriage may secure peace or access to land. A rare object may enhance prestige because it proves connection beyond the visible horizon. Within the settlement, inequality may grow quietly. Some houses stand on larger platforms. Some families may control better fields, older groves, ritual knowledge, trade connections, or the labor needed to maintain important earthworks. Certain people may eat better, wear more elaborate ornaments, receive richer burials, or live closer to central spaces. Yet the evidence for hierarchy can be difficult to read. A large mound might signal high status, communal function, repeated rebuilding, or all of these together. A rich burial may represent power, affection, ritual role, or unusual circumstance. The society may be neither a simple egalitarian village nor a fully centralized kingdom, but something in between, shifting across time as population, belief, and environment change. The record suggests complexity, but not always the kind that fits neatly into familiar categories. Women, men, children, elders, craft specialists, ritual leaders, farmers, fishers, builders, and travelers all leave different traces, though not equally visible ones. The labor of cooking, weaving childcare plant, processing, healing, and household maintenance can be archaeologically faint, yet it sustains everything else. A ceremonial platform cannot matter if no one grows the food for gatherings. A causeway cannot be repaired if households are failing. A leader cannot command loyalty if daily needs are ignored for too long. The impressive features hidden beneath the jungle are built on repeated domestic labor, the kind often overlooked because it does not look dramatic when uncovered in the soil. But without that labor, no society rises and no mystery remains for later centuries to puzzle over. Evening brings another rhythm. Heat loosens. Insects sharpen their sound. Smoke thickens near houses. People return from gardens, water forest, or construction work carrying food tools and news. Meals are prepared. Fires become centers of visibility in a darkening world. Stories may be told, though their exact words are lost. Bodies rest, but not completely. Someone listens for animals. Someone worries about a sick child. Someone thinks about a dispute, a debt, a marriage arrangement, a coming ceremony, or a field that did not grow well. The jungle at night is not silent. It surrounds the settlement with movement calls, dripping leaves, sudden crashes, and the sense that the human clearing is only a temporary agreement with a much larger life. This is the society before it becomes archaeology, not silent, not vanished, not hidden. It is a living world held together by food, work, memory, obligation, and adaptation. The later ruins will show lines in the earth, fragments of pottery, altered soils, and mounds beneath trees. But those traces begin as ordinary acts repeated so often that they become durable. A woman grinding food, a child carrying water, a group repairing a raised path, a canoe maker shaping wood, an elder pointing toward an old flood mark, a family tending a grove planted by ancestors. These are not small details beside the great mystery. They are the mystery's human center. The jungle will one day cover their houses, but for now the forest opens around them, and the settlement breathes with the fragile confidence of people who believe their world will continue. What remains after a jungle society disappears is rarely generous. It does not hand over a complete story. It offers stains, fragments, ridges, pits, changes in soil color, buried charcoal, broken pottery, pollen, seeds, bones when the ground allows them to survive, and patterns that only become meaningful when seen together. The hidden society begins to return not as a voice but as evidence. A shard of ceramic emerges from dark earth after rain. A line of raised ground continues too straight to be natural. A cluster of mounds surrounds a space that once may have been open. A patch of soil is darker and richer than the forest floor around it. These are quiet signals, and they require a different patience from the discovery of a standing temple. The jungle does not give back a lost world as a spectacle. It releases it one clue at a time. Pottery is often among the first and most stubborn witnesses. Wood rots thatch, collapses, baskets vanish, and cloth rarely survives in damp tropical conditions, but fired clay endures. It breaks, but it does not easily disappear. Its fragments can reveal where people cooked, stored food, carried water, served meals, held ceremonies, or discarded the remains of ordinary domestic life. The thickness of a vessel wall, the mineral temper mixed into the clay, the firing mark's surface, finish painted design in sized line or soot stain can all become information. A plain cooking pot may speak of diet and daily labour. A finely decorated vessel may suggest identity exchange, ritual status, or regional style. What survives in the record suggests not only that people lived here, but that they made choices shaped by habit, taste, technology, and belonging. The same pottery can also reveal time. Styles change, shapes shift, decorative patterns appear, spread, transform, and vanish. A layer with one ceramic tradition may sit beneath another, suggesting continuity, replacement, influence, migration, or internal change. The evidence remains incomplete, and pottery alone cannot explain a society, but it often provides the rough grammar of archaeological sequence. When fragments from a buried settlement resemble those from another region, they may hint at contact or shared traditions. When they differ sharply from nearby sites, they may suggest local identity. A broken vessel lying in soil may seem small, but in a landscape where houses are gone and words are absent, pottery becomes one of the most durable forms of cultural memory. Charcoal speaks in a different language. It is the black remnant of burned wood seed thatch food or landscape, and its meaning depends on context. A few scattered flecks may come from a hearth. A thick burned layer may mark a house fire, a clearing event, a ceremonial deposit, or a moment of destruction. Radiocarbon dating can place charcoal within time, though the date always requires careful interpretation, because the burned material may be older than the event that deposited it. Charcoal from long-lived wood, for example, may carry the age of the tree as well as the age of the fire. Still, when many dates are gathered from different parts of a settlement, a pattern begins to appear. The hidden society becomes anchored to centuries rather than legend. In the soil itself, the past can become unusually visible. Human occupation changes earth. Fires add charcoal. Cooking and eating add bone shell, ash, fat, and organic matter. Pottery breaks into the ground. Waste accumulates. Houses are rebuilt. Gardens are enriched. Over generations, these actions can create dark, fertile soils that stand apart from the surrounding forest. In some tropical regions, such human-made or human-modified soils have become one of the strongest signs of long-term settlement and land management. They remind modern observers that ancient people did not always build upward. Sometimes they built downward and inward, altering the very medium from which future plants would grow. A place may look like ordinary forest while its soil remembers centuries of meals. Plant remains deepen the story, though they are often fragile. Seed starch grains, phytoliths, pollen, and microscopic residues can reveal what people grew, gathered, processed, and burned. Some plants leave distinctive traces even when the plant itself is gone. Phytoliths, tiny mineral bodies formed in certain plant tissues, can survive after organic material decays. Starch grains may cling to stone tools or pottery. Pollen can settle in wet deposits, though it may travel and mix in ways that complicate interpretation. These traces can suggest the presence of crops, useful trees, managed vegetation, or changes in forest composition around a settlement. Scholars still debate how to separate natural plant distributions from human influence in many cases, but the possibility itself is powerful. The forest canopy may hold echoes of old gardens. Animal remains, when preserved, add another layer. Fish bones, turtle shells, mammal bones, bird bones, mollusk shells, and burned fragments can show what people ate and where they gathered food. A dominance of fish remains may point toward river and wetland dependence. Shell deposits may show repeated harvesting from nearby waters. Cut marks, burning, and breakage patterns can reveal butchery, cooking, disposal, or craft use. Yet tropical preservation is uneven. Acidic soils can dissolve bone. Flooding can move remains. Animals can disturb deposits. The absence of bones does not always mean the absence of meat, and a single refuse pit does not represent the whole diet. No single explanation fully accounts for every surviving pattern. Still, the remains that endure remind the story to stay grounded in body's hunger and practical survival. Then there are the earthworks, the large quiet shapes that often remain hidden until mapped. Mounds, platforms, ditches, embankments, canals, terraces, reservoirs, and causeways can survive as subtle variations in height. On the ground, a person may climb a gentle rise without realizing it was built. Under thick vegetation, even experienced explorers can miss a network of features. But once measured carefully, the forms begin to repeat. A mound may align with others. A ditch may enclose a settlement zone. A raised road may connect two habitation clusters. A canal may follow a logic tied to water management, transport, or food production. These are not isolated accidents. They are the skeleton of an organized landscape. The difficulty lies in interpretation. A ditch could drain water, mark a boundary, defend a settlement structure, ritual movement, or serve several of these functions across time. A mound could support a house, a communal building, a burial area, a ceremonial structure, or a changing sequence of uses. A straight path may be practical, symbolic, or both. Archaeology often has to resist the temptation to assign one purpose too quickly. Ancient landscapes are lived in, reused, repaired, reinterpreted, and sometimes misunderstood, even by later generations of the same community. What begins as a drainage channel may later become a boundary. What begins as a house mound may later carry ancestral meaning. The evidence remains incomplete because human places are rarely frozen in a single meaning. Burials, when found, bring the hidden society closer and make interpretation more delicate. Human remains can reveal age, health, diet, injury, disease, ancestry, migration, and social differences. But they also represent people who are mourned, placed remembered, or sometimes treated in ways shaped by fear, reverence, or obligation. Grave goods may indicate status, role identity, or ritual expectation. Differences in burial treatment can suggest inequality, kinship, special office, or changing beliefs. Yet in wet tropical environments, burials may be poorly preserved or absent from visible sites. Some societies may have practiced forms of burial that leave little trace. Others may have placed the dead in areas not yet found. The silence of the burial record can be meaningful, but it can also be accidental. There are also absences that matter. Writing may not survive or may never have been used in the way later literate civilizations used it. Perishable art may vanish. Wooden carvings, painted walls, woven textiles, featherwork masks, and ritual objects may disappear completely. Music leaves almost nothing unless instruments survive. Oral histories change, travel, or are broken by conquest, disease, and displacement. The archaeologist then stands before a society whose most expressive materials may be gone. This creates an imbalance. Earthworks and pottery become louder than songs, gestures, names, and prayers. It is easy to mistake the durable for the important. A careful reconstruction must remember that what survives is not the same as what mattered most. Even so, the surviving clues can reveal a society of surprising scale and skill. When mounds, dark soils, fields' roots, and water systems are found together, they suggest planning beyond the household. When similar features appear across a broader region, they suggest networks of settlement, shared methods, and perhaps shared identities. When the patterns are older than expected, they challenge the old belief that tropical forests were marginal to human history. This is one of the most important lessons hidden beneath the jungle. Invisibility is not evidence of insignificance. Some societies leave subtle records because they build with materials that return to life. Others are hidden because later assumptions trained observers not to see them. The clues are not only underground, they can survive in the present landscape. A grove of useful trees near old earthworks may hint at past management. A modern village may stand near an ancient settlement because the same water, soil, and roots remain attractive. A path used today may follow a much older line of movement. Local knowledge may remember mounds, unusual soils, old pottery scatters, or places avoided for reasons that outsiders do not immediately understand. Too often, older exploration ignored such knowledge, or treated local people as guides rather than as bearers of history. A more careful approach recognizes that descendant and nearby communities may preserve connections to landscapes that academic maps have only recently learned to notice. By the end of this evidence trail, the hidden society becomes both clearer and more mysterious. It has pottery, food systems, water control, settlement planning, and long occupation. It likely has ritual life, social organization, trade, and memory. It may have altered the forest in ways still visible through soils and plants. Yet its name may remain unknown. Its language may be gone. Its political structure may resist easy labels. Its collapse or transformation may not be recorded in any surviving text. The land offers signals, but not complete confession. It shows that people were here, that they shaped the jungle, that they worked with skill and intention, and that their world was more complex than the silent canopy suggests. The rest must be approached carefully, with imagination held close to evidence and uncertainty allowed to remain where the soil has not yet spoken. The jungle begins to change long before anyone calls it a crisis. At first, the signs are small enough to argue with. A field that once produced well gives less than expected. A drainage channel clogs faster after heavy rain. A riverbank collapses where canoes used to land. Fish arrive late in a familiar pool. Fruit fails on trees that elders remember as dependable. Insects seem worse in one season, then sickness follows in another. None of this proves disaster by itself. Every ancient community knows difficult years, and people who live close to the land are accustomed to variation. The danger lies in repetition. When several small failures begin to overlap, when recovery after each bad season takes longer, when old knowledge still helps but no longer solves enough, the society's confidence starts to thin. Climate does not need to strike like a single blow to reshape a civilization. It can press slowly, almost invisibly, through rainfall patterns, flood timing, drought frequency, storm intensity, soil, moisture, river movement, and the health of forests and crops. In a jungle society built around water, this pressure is especially intimate. Too much rain can be as dangerous as too little. Floods can drown, fields rot stored food, wash away paths, damage platforms, spread disease, and force people into crowded dry spaces. Drought can shrink fish habitats, reduce crops, harden clay, increase fire risk, and make distant water sources more important. The evidence remains incomplete for many hidden tropical societies, but environmental records from lakes, caves, pollen, deposit sediments, and tree growth in some regions show that ancient communities often lived through periods of significant climatic instability. The human story must be placed inside that larger weathered frame. A society that has engineered itself into the land is not helpless before change, but its strengths can become dependencies. Raised fields work well when water rises within a familiar range. Drainage channels function when maintained, and when storms do not exceed their design. Gardens thrive when rainfall shade and soil fertility remain within expected limits. Managed forests provide resilience, but even resilience has thresholds. If floods become more destructive, people must repair platforms more often. If droughts lengthen, gardens may need to shift closer to reliable water. If soil fertility declines, households must work harder to maintain yields. If game retreats or fish patterns change, more pressure falls on crops. No single explanation fully accounts for collapse, but repeated environmental stress can turn ordinary labor into a burden that grows heavier each year. Soil exhaustion is one of the quieter threats. The first generations of settlement may find abundance in disturbed forest edges, fertile flood deposits, old organic matter, and carefully managed gardens. Over time, population growth demands more from the same land. Fields may be used more frequently and rested less. Forest fallow periods may shorten. Erosion may increase where slopes are cleared or paths concentrate runoff. Nutrients may wash away after heavy rains. People can fight this through mulching, burning, composting, rotating raised fields, and the creation of enriched soils, but the work requires knowledge, time, and social coordination. When pressure rises, the temptation is often to take more now and repair later. Ancient communities are not uniquely foolish in this. It is one of the oldest human habits. The forest itself responds. Areas once managed as gardens or useful groves may become more open, more fire-prone, or more dominated by certain species. Wetlands may expand or contract. Rivers may cut new channels and abandon old ones. Trees that once marked stable boundaries may fall in storms. A causeway built across seasonally wet ground may sink unevenly. A canal may silt up, forcing repeated clearing. The people who maintain these systems see change not as an abstract environmental process, but as work. More digging, more carrying, more planting, more rebuilding, more walking. To reach food, more negotiation over who must contribute labor. Environmental stress becomes social stress because land is never just land. It is inheritance, food memory, and status, and water management may become one of the first visible places where trouble gathers. In stable years, channels and raised surfaces create order. During unusual floods, that order breaks. Water ignores boundaries. It cuts through embankments, pools in house areas, contaminates storage spaces, and leaves behind mud where people need dry ground. During drought, the same channels may stand empty, exposing cracked beds and concentrating people and animals around shrinking water. Mosquitoes may breed in stagnant pools after irregular rains. Disease patterns may shift. The evidence for ancient illness is often hard to recover, especially where human remains preserve poorly, but it would be unrealistic to imagine environmental disruption without health consequences. Wet heat is generous to life, including the small forms of life that harm human bodies. Crop risk deepens the anxiety. A diverse food system protects against failure, but diversity does not make people immune. Root crops may survive conditions that damage grains. Tree crops may feed people when gardens fail. Fish may compensate for poor harvests if water remains productive. Yet if several systems fail together, resilience weakens. A drought that damages gardens may also reduce fish. A flood that destroys low fields may also contaminate stored foods and disrupt travel. A storm that topples fruit trees may require years of recovery. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient societies were skilled at spreading risk. But even skilled systems can face combinations of stress beyond normal memory. The human response is not immediate abandonment. People adapt. They raise platforms higher. They dig channels deeper. They move gardens. They plant different crops. They expand into new areas. They store more carefully. They intensify fishing. They schedule ceremonies asking for order in the seasons. They negotiate with neighbours. They send families to distant kin during shortages. They may build more, not less, as conditions worsen, because construction becomes a way to solve problems and display control. This is a lesser-known pattern in some histories of collapsed societies can appear energetic, even when they are under strain. A surge in building does not always mean confidence. Sometimes it means urgency. Ritual may also intensify. When rains fail or floods destroy familiar ground, communities often seek meaning as well as solutions. Ceremonies can unite people, redistribute food, calm fear, reinforce leadership and explain suffering. They can also demand resources. Feasts require surplus. Offerings require goods. Ritual specialists may gain influence if they are believed to mediate between human action and unstable seasons. Leaders may tie their authority to the promise of fertility, water protection, or ancestral favour. If conditions improve, their prestige grows. If conditions worsen, repeatedly trust can fracture. Scholars still debate how deeply environmental stress shaped the political and ritual life of many jungle societies, but it is difficult to separate weather from power when survival depends so directly on ecological timing. The turning point may not be recognized while it's happening. There is rarely a day when a community agrees that the old world has ended. Instead, the future shrinks. Repair consumes time once used for expansion. Stored food runs out earlier. Disputes over land become sharper. Younger families find fewer good places to build. Some households leave temporarily and do not return. Trade visits become irregular because paths flood, rivers shift, or neighbours face their own shortages. A central space that once gathered people easily may require more effort to maintain. The society continues, but its margin for error narrows. There may be evidence of this stress in sediments, abandonment layers, erosion deposits, changes in crop remains, shifts in settlement location, repairs to water systems, or the reduced use of certain areas. Yet the record rarely speaks plainly. A burned layer might mean conflict, accidental fire ritual clearing, or drought-related burning. A deserted mound might indicate collapse, migration changing political fashion, or a move to nearby ground not yet found. A decline in pottery could mean fewer people, different habits, or poorer preservation. Interpretation must remain cautious. What survives in the record suggests pressure, but pressure does not always equal immediate failure. Still, something begins to strain beneath the visible order. The society that once turned ecological knowledge into stability now faces a landscape less predictable than before. Its people are not passive victims of nature. They are experienced, inventive, and capable of remarkable adjustment. But the jungle world they know is shifting around the edges. Water arrives at the wrong time or in the wrong amount. Soil demands more labor. Forest resources no longer answer exactly as memory expects. Every solution carries cost. Every repair draws hands away from something else. Every bad year leaves a residue of doubt. In the late afternoon after rain, a person may stand on a raised path and look across ground that was once dependable. The air smells of wet leaves and disturbed mud. A ditch overflows where it used to drain cleanly. A field lies partly drowned. Beyond it, the forest shines indifferent and alive. The settlement still has smoke voices, tools, ceremonies, stored knowledge and pride. It has not vanished. But beneath its daily rhythms, a question has begun to grow, not spoken, as a question not written anywhere, but carried in the body each time the sky darkens too soon, or the river fails to fall when it should. The land that helped build the society is changing, and the people must decide how long they can keep changing with it. Environmental pressure is never only environmental for very long. A failed field becomes a family problem. A damaged causeway becomes a labor problem. A shrinking water source becomes a political problem. A delayed harvest becomes a ritual problem. The society hidden beneath the jungle has already learned to live with uncertainty. But as stress gathers, the old arrangements begin to carry more weight than they were built to hold. People do not experience strain as a neat category called collapse. They experience it as arguments over work, anxiety over food, suspicion toward leaders, tension between households, sharper boundaries around land, and the quiet knowledge that some families are better protected than others. Population growth may be one source of this pressure. A successful settlement attracts people, produces children who survive, draws relatives from smaller communities, and becomes a center for exchange and ceremony. What begins as strength gradually increases demand. More mouths require more gardens, more fishing, more stored food, more fuel, more house platforms, more repairs, and more coordination. The surrounding land may still seem abundant, but not every patch is equally useful. The best dry rises the most reliable water access, the easiest clay sources, and the most productive gardens become socially important. Once a place becomes valuable, it rarely remains free of dispute. The evidence remains incomplete, but many ancient societies show signs that growth can turn local success into local strain. Leadership, if it exists in a formal way, becomes more visible under such conditions. A leader may be expected to organize labor for earthworks, settle disputes, host feasts, maintain alliances, direct ritual, and protect access to resources. In good years, this authority can appear generous and stabilizing. People gather food, circulate ceremonies, affirm shared identity, and construction projects show that the community can still act as one body. In difficult years, the same authority becomes vulnerable. If leaders ask for more labor when households are hungry, resentment grows. If they hold feasts while ordinary stores are low, generosity may look like display. If rituals fail to bring stability, sacred prestige weakens. No single explanation fully accounts for social breakdown, but trust is often one of the first invisible structures to crack. The need to maintain public works can sharpen inequality. Raised paths, canals, platforms, reservoirs, and communal spaces do not repair themselves. The jungle is always working against them with rain roots, silt animals, and decay. If environmental stress increases, maintenance becomes more urgent and more frequent. Someone must decide who works when and for whose benefit. A canal serving several neighbourhoods may justify broad cooperation. A platform associated with a powerful lineage may not. A causeway linking settlements may be praised as communal infrastructure, but the households farthest from its benefits may feel the labour differently. In this way, engineering becomes a test of social cohesion. The same earthworks that once expressed unity can become reminders of obligation. Inside the settlement, status differences may grow more difficult to ignore. Some families have older claims to land better positions near central spaces, stronger marriage alliances, richer stores, or closer ties to ritual authority. Others live at the edges, work poorer soils, or depend more heavily on access granted by others. In ordinary years, these differences may be accepted, softened by kinship, feasting reciprocal labour and shared ceremony. Under pressure, they harden. A household with surplus can lend food and gain influence. A family without reserves may fall into debt or dependency. A leader who controls access to stored goods or trade connections may become more powerful but also more resented. What survives in the record may show this only faintly through house-size burial treatment, imported goods, or the distribution of fine pottery, yet behind such traces are human calculations of need and advantage. Conflict does not have to mean open warfare at first. It may begin as avoidance. A path to a neighbouring cluster is used less often. A marriage arrangement fails. People stop attending a ceremony in the same numbers. A group withholds labour from a repair project. Accusations circulate after a poor harvest. Ritual specialists blame improper behaviour, neglected ancestors, broken taboos, or rival communities. Households move gardens farther away. Boundaries that were once flexible become guarded. The jungle, already difficult to cross, can make separation easy. A community can fragment without a dramatic battle simply by failing to gather as it once did. Yet violence is possible, and it should not be erased from the story. Archaeological signs of conflict can include defensive earthworks, burned structures, trauma on human remains, weapon settlement shifts to more protected locations, or abrupt abandonment layers. But the evidence is often difficult to interpret in tropical regions. A ditch may be defensive, or it may drain water. A burned structure may be attacked, accidentally destroyed, ritually burned, or cleared. Human remains may not preserve well enough to show injury. Scholars still debate the degree to which warfare shaped many hidden jungle societies, and careful narration must avoid turning uncertainty into drama. Still, when resources tighten and political trust weakens, conflict becomes one of several plausible pressures pressing from within. Ritual demands may also become heavier. A society facing uncertainty often turns towards ceremony, not because people are irrational, but because ceremony organizes fear and gives action a meaningful shape. It gathers labor, redistributes food, reinforces identity, and links the living to ancestors' spirits or cosmic order. In times of stress, ceremonies may become larger, more frequent, more costly, or more politically charged. Leaders may need to prove that they still stand between disorder and survival. Feasts may become displays of abundance precisely when abundance is harder to secure. Offerings may become more urgent. Sacred spaces may be repaired or expanded even as ordinary households struggle. This does not mean ritual causes decline. It means ritual is part of the society's response, and responses themselves carry costs. There is a subtler kind of pressure in memory. Elders remember when certain fields yielded more, when floods reached lower marks, when neighbouring groups came freely, when ceremonies filled the central space, when young people did not leave to seek better land. Such memories can comfort, but they can also accuse the present. Younger people inherit a world that may no longer match the instructions given to them. They are told where water used to stand, where crops used to thrive, when rains used to arrive, how rituals used to unfold. If the old knowledge still works only part of the time, the society faces a painful question without needing to speak it aloud. Is the world failing the ancestors, or are the descendants failing to understand the world? Migration becomes one answer. Not a grand exodus at first, but small departures. A daughter joins relatives upriver and does not return. A younger household establishes itself near a more reliable wetland. A group moves seasonally and then stretches the season longer each year. Families disperse to reduce pressure on food and land. This kind of movement may leave a confusing archaeological record. The central settlement may decline while nearby smaller sites grow. Pottery styles may spread outward. Old ceremonial spaces may remain visited but no longer inhabited. What looks like disappearance from one place may be reorganization across a wider landscape. The evidence remains incomplete, and this possibility matters because collapse is often less absolute than later storytelling makes it seem. Trade networks may weaken at the same time. A society under stress depends more heavily on external ties, yet those ties may become less reliable if neighbouring communities face their own problems. Drought, flooding, disease, conflict, or shifting political alliances can disrupt exchange routes. Rare goods stop arriving. Marriage partners become harder to secure. News travels more slowly or with more fear attached. A central place that once gained prestige by connecting others may lose influence if routes change or if people decide the journey is no longer worth the risk. In a world where rivers and paths hold society together, disconnection can be as damaging as hunger. The hidden society's internal strain is therefore cumulative. It is not one cause, but a tightening weave of many causes. Food stress increases labour demands. Labour demands intensify political resentment. Political resentment weakens cooperation. Weakened cooperation makes infrastructure harder to maintain. Poorly maintained infrastructure worsens environmental stress. Ritual responses gather people but require resources. Migration reduces pressure but also drains labour and continuity. Conflict, even if limited, damages trust. No single explanation fully accounts for the unravelling, because no society is held together by one thread, and still daily life continues. People do not wake each morning inside a historical process. They wake inside tasks. A roof leaks and must be repaired. A child is hungry. A canoe needs patching. A field must be weeded. A relative is ill. A ceremony approaches. A debt must be honoured. An old path is overgrown. A leader sends word that labour is needed on the canal. Someone refuses. Someone obeys but remembers the refusal. Someone says the rains will improve. Someone else has stopped believing that. This is how pressure from within feels before it becomes visible from the outside, not as a single collapse, but as 1,000 strained decisions. By now the society still stands, but its shape has changed. The central spaces may remain active, yet perhaps less confidently. Some platforms are carefully maintained while others begin to soften at the edges. Some paths stay open because they serve power, while smaller routes fade. The forest presses closer in neglected places. The settlement has not been abandoned, but it is no longer expanding with the same ease. Beneath the canopy, the old balance between land labour belief and authority is becoming harder to keep. The danger is no longer only the river, the rain, the soil, or the forest. It is the possibility that the people themselves can no longer agree on what must be saved first. The vanishing moment is rarely a moment. It is usually a thinning, a loosening, a slow withdrawal of certainty from places that once seemed permanent. One season, a household leaves a platform unrepaired because there are too few hands or too little reason to return. Another season, a garden at the edge of the settlement is allowed to grow wild. A path that once carried daily footsteps becomes a route used only during ceremonies, then only by hunters, then not at all. A canoe landing silts over. A drainage channel fills with leaves. A mound remains visible, but its meaning begins to change from lived space to old place. To later eyes, the site appears abandoned. To the people inside the process, it may feel less like abandonment than adaptation, retreat, grief, or simple survival. There may be no final fire, no enemy at the gate, no single disaster preserved in a clean layer of ash. Some societies do end violently, and archaeology sometimes finds burned buildings, weapon wounds, defensive works, or abrupt breaks in occupation. But many disappear from the visible record by degrees. Families move towards safer water, better soils, stronger kin, more reliable trade, or smaller communities where obligations are easier to manage. Ritual centres may outlive ordinary residents. People may return seasonally to old places for ceremonies, burials, harvests, or memory, even after daily life has shifted elsewhere. What survives in the record can make this difficult to see. Archaeology often turns continuous human adjustment into sharp categories: occupied, abandoned, collapsed. Life is rarely so tidy. The first departures might be practical. A family whose fields fail several years in a row joins relatives beyond the next river. Another group moves closer to a wetland where fish remain reliable during dry seasons. Young adults marry into neighbouring communities and do not bring their children back. A cluster of houses at the settlement's edge empties after sickness dispute or food shortage. No one declares the society finished. The central place still functions. Smoke still rises. Ceremonies still gather people. Leaders still speak with authority or try to. Yet the population is no longer held in place with the old strength. Each departure makes the next one easier, because abandonment spreads not only through land but through expectation. As people leave, labour systems weaken. A raised causeway needs many feet to keep it open and many hands to repair its damaged edges. A canal that once served several neighbourhoods requires clearing before the rains. A central platform must be kept free of roots and erosion. When fewer households remain the same, maintenance becomes heavier. Those who stay may feel trapped between loyalty and exhaustion. If the old centre still demands labour but offers less security, resentment deepens. If leaders reduce demands, infrastructure declines. Either choice carries loss. This is one of the quiet mechanics of abandonment. Once maintenance falls behind, the landscape begins to help people leave. The jungle responds quickly. In a tropical environment, neglect is visible almost at once. Seedlings appear in swept spaces. Vines cross unused paths. Leaf litter gathers in drainage channels. Animals dig into soft edges of platforms. Rain cuts small gullies into slopes no one repairs. A roof collapses and within months plants grow through the fallen thatch. A house post rots at ground level. The outline of a dwelling remains for a while, then becomes a patch of richer vegetation. People who return after only a few seasons may find a familiar place strangely altered, not gone, but already less theirs. The forest does not wait for historians to decide when abandonment begins. Food practices may shift as well. Large gardens near the central settlement shrink. More effort goes into scattered plots, tree crops, hunting, fishing, or movement between seasonal camps. Stored surplus becomes harder to gather in one place. Feasts become smaller or less frequent. Pottery production may decline in quantity, change in style, or move to new locations. Imported goods may appear less often, either because trade weakens or because the settlement no longer holds the same role in exchange. What survives in the record suggests that such transitions can look like cultural decline when seen only from the centre, but from the perspective of those who moved, they may represent a successful change in strategy. A society can vanish from one kind of evidence while continuing in another form. The dead may reveal part of this transition, though often imperfectly. Burials may become fewer in central areas, move to different places, or change in treatment. Some old ancestral spaces may remain important even as residence declines. People may carry memory with them, but they may also leave ancestors behind in the land, creating a reason to return. In many societies, abandonment does not mean forgetting. It can mean turning a settlement into a place of origin, warning sacred power or loss. The evidence remains incomplete, especially where bodies do not preserve well, but a site can remain socially alive long after it stops being densely inhabited. There is also the possibility of disease, a force that can empty houses faster than hunger alone. In humid, densely inhabited environments, illness can spread through water insects, crowding animals, and trade contacts. Epidemics before the modern era often leave little direct evidence unless skeletal remains preserve or written records survive. Later colonial-era diseases devastated many indigenous populations across the Americas and other tropical regions, and those catastrophes sometimes erased or fragmented communities whose earlier histories were already complex. For the hidden society beneath the jungle, disease may have played a role at some stage, but careful interpretation is necessary. It is too easy to make sickness a universal answer, where the evidence does not prove it. Still, the human vulnerability is real. A community under environmental and social stress has fewer reserves when illness arrives. Conflict may accelerate departure. If neighbouring groups compete over land-water trade or prestige, households may withdraw from exposed areas. Settlements may become more defensible or more dispersed. Certain paths may fall out of use because they are unsafe. A burned structure, a cluster of projectile points, a defensive ditch or trauma on bones could point toward violence, but each sign requires caution. No single explanation fully accounts for the vanishing. A community can be pushed by climate, strained by politics, weakened by disease, and frightened by conflict all at once. The mystery deepens because these forces rarely leave separate fingerprints. They overlap in the soil. There may be moments when the old centre tries to reassert itself. A platform is rebuilt larger than before. A ceremony gathers distant families. A leader sponsors a feast to renew alliance. A canal is cleared in a burst of collective work. Such efforts may succeed for a time. The settlement may flicker with renewed life, not unlike a fire stirred from embers. This matters because abandonment is not always a steady downward line. People try to restore what is slipping. They remember former strength. They adapt old rituals to new fears. They repair, return, negotiate, and rebuild. Some places survive crises by changing. Others survive for a while, then fail later. The archaeological record may capture only the last phase, while the long struggle before it remains mostly invisible. Eventually, however, some threshold is crossed. It may be demographic when too few people remain to maintain the centre. It may be ecological when food systems no longer support settlement at the old scale. It may be political when authority loses legitimacy. It may be spiritual when a sacred place becomes associated with failure rather than protection. It may be practical when a better opportunity elsewhere becomes more convincing than the burden of staying. People carry what they can: tools, seeds, vessels, ornaments, stories, children, obligations, perhaps bones or sacred objects, perhaps only memory. Heavier things remain, platforms remain, broken pots remain, charcoal remains, dark soil remains. The land keeps what cannot easily move. The final residents, if there are final residents, may not think of themselves as ending a civilization. They may be an old couple reluctant to leave a ritual caretaker, a small household waiting for relatives, a group returning seasonally until return becomes too difficult. They may continue to use one mound while others vanish under growth. They may cook beside a house whose neighbouring platforms are already empty. They may walk a causeway that trees have begun to narrow. The last fire in a place like this does not announce itself. It burns, warms food, or bodies turns wood to charcoal and goes out. Later rain presses ash into the ground. Then the record changes from human time to forest time. Post-rot, roofs fall, earthen edges slump. Seeds take root in house floors. Termites, fungi, ants, worms, and roots become the new occupants. The settlement does not disappear because nothing remains. It disappears because what remains no longer looks human to anyone who does not know how to read it. This is the strange mercy and cruelty of the jungle. It hides destruction inside growth. It makes ruins beautiful by making them difficult to see. The vanished society may not vanish from humanity at all. Its descendants may live elsewhere, carrying language, memory crops, rituals, or fragments of identity into new landscapes. Nearby communities may know the old place by another name. Stories may survive in altered form. The forest may preserve useful trees planted by ancestors. A trail may continue to follow an ancient line even after its original builders are forgotten. Collapse in this sense is not always extinction. It is transformation so deep that outsiders later mistake it for disappearance. Still standing at the abandoned centre, one can feel why the mystery endures. The open plaza is no longer open. The path is half root, half shadow. The mound that once held a house or sacred building rises quietly under trees. No voices gather. No smoke lifts from roofs. No one repairs the channel before the rains. The society has slipped beyond the range of ordinary memory, leaving only earth to testify that it was ever here, and earth testifies slowly. It waits for storms, shovels, maps, scanners, and the patient suspicion that a hill may not be a hill, a forest may not be wilderness, and silence may be the last covering over a human world that chose or was forced to leave. When nature takes the city, it does not arrive as an invader. It arrives as rain, seed, root, rot, shade, and patience. The first season after people stop clearing a path, small plants appear along its edges. The next season, saplings lean into the opening, their leaves catching light that once reached the ground. Vines test the empty space. Fallen branches remain where no one moves them. Leaf litter thickens, softening the surface underfoot. A raised road that once carried baskets, tools, children, elders, and ritual processions begins to lose its edges. It still exists, but its meaning has changed. It is no longer a route maintained by memory. It is a slightly drier line in a forest that has begun to forget the difference. The abandoned houses vanish quickly because they were never made to become ruins in the dramatic sense. Roofs sag under rain. Palm thatch rots and collapses inward. Wooden posts soften at ground level where moisture and insects work steadily. Woven walls loosen, split, and fall into the floor. A hearth may remain for a while as a dark patch then disappear beneath leaves and soil. Pottery fragments stay, but the vessels that once shaped daily life lie broken and scattered. Baskets, mats, cordage clothing, featherwork wooden tools and painted surfaces are taken almost completely by decay. What was once a complete human interior becomes a stain in the earth, a pattern of post holes, a concentration of ash, a few durable objects abandoned by chance or intention. Earthen architecture lasts longer, though not unchanged. A platform raised by generations begins to slump at the sides. Rain cuts tiny channels into its face. Roots enter cracks and widen them. Burrowing animals disturb layers. Termites build where people once swept floors. A mound becomes rounded, gentler, less clearly made. Its height remains, but its geometry softens. The same happens to embankments, ditches and causeways. Edges blur. Channels fill with silt leaves and standing water. A ditch may become a shallow, wet hollow where frogs gather. A canal may turn into a seasonal ribbon of dark soil. A reservoir may become a pond, then a marsh, then a forested depression. The built landscape does not vanish in one act. It is translated into ecological forms. This translation is why jungle ruins can remain hidden in plain sight. A stone wall, even broken, still declares a boundary. An earthen platform under trees is more ambiguous. It can be mistaken for a natural rise, especially where the land is already uneven. A causeway can become a ridge where certain plants grow better because the soil drains differently. A plaza can become a patch of younger forest or a gap filled by particular species. A canal can look like an old stream bed. A ditch can be read as erosion. The evidence remains incomplete until patterns are traced across distance. One mound may be nature. A planned arrangement of mounds, roots and channels is harder to dismiss. The forest that returns is not necessarily the same forest that stood before settlement. This is one of the lesser-known details that changes the entire story. Abandonment does not reset the landscape to an untouched beginning. Human actions leave ecological afterlives. Enriched soils may support different plants from surrounding ground. Fruit trees planted or protected by people may survive and reproduce. Disturbed areas may favour fast-growing species. Old gardens may become groves. Burned patches may regenerate in distinctive ways. Water channels may continue to guide drainage long after maintenance stops. What looks like wild jungle may be a descendant landscape shaped by both natural succession and ancient human preference. The forest takes the city, but it also inherits it. Animals become part of the covering. Birds perch on abandoned structures and drop seeds. Bats feed in fruiting trees and spread new growth. Monkeys, rodents, tapirs, peccaries, deer, and countless smaller creatures move through old clearings carrying seeds in fur stomachs and droppings. Ants and termites break down organic matter. Worms and insects mix layers of soil. Burrowing animals disturb artifacts, sometimes confusing later archaeology by moving fragments from one context to another. The settlement becomes habitat. A former house mound may shelter roots and small mammals. A former ditch may hold amphibians. A former plaza may become a feeding ground. The human plan becomes animal geography. Water continues the work with equal persistence. In heavy rains, sheets of runoff move across abandoned surfaces without channels cleared to guide them. Sediment washes into low places. Flood spread silt over pottery scatters, sealing some remains while moving others. Riverbanks shift. A landing place collapses into the current. A bend cuts closer to the old settlement, or abandons it farther from the main flow. Seasonal pools form where drainage systems fail. In some places, water preserves by burying quickly. In others, it destroys by eroding exposed layers. No single explanation fully accounts for what survives and what disappears, because preservation is a negotiation between material soil, chemistry, moisture disturbance and chance. Time changes human memory as thoroughly as it changes Earth. The first generation after abandonment may still know the old place intimately, people may return to harvest fruit, collect materials, visit graves, perform rites, or remember ancestors. The second generation may know the site through stories and selected paths. Later generations may know only a name, a warning, a sacred association, or nothing at all, depending on migration disruption, violence, disease, and cultural continuity. In some landscapes, descendant communities may preserve meaningful connections to places that outsiders consider lost. In others, the chain of memory may be broken by catastrophe. The jungle's silence is therefore not only botanical, it can also be the result of historical trauma. As centuries pass, the settlement's human order becomes harder to detect from the ground. Trees grow directly from platforms. Roots grip old surfaces and pull artifacts upward or downward. New soil forms above ancient floors. Fallen trunks tear holes into buried layers when they decay. The canopy closes, creating shade where sunlight once struck open plazas. The soundscape changes. Instead of voices, tools, footsteps, and ceremony, there are insects, birds, rain, branches, and the sudden movement of animals through undergrowth. The place is full of life, but not the same life. This is what makes the image of a lost jungle society so powerful and so misleading. The city is not dead in a simple way. It has been absorbed into another living system. For later travellers, the ruins become almost invisible. A hunter may know the mound as a useful lookout without knowing it was built. A farmer may find pottery in the soil and treat it as an old curiosity. A child may climb a raised platform as though it were a hill. A local story may describe the place as old, dangerous, ancestral, or haunted. An outsider may pass through with no awareness at all. Dense vegetation limits sight. Heat exhausts attention. Insects distract. The forest repeats shapes until deliberate forms blur into natural ones. People tend to see what they expect to see, and for a long time many outsiders expected wilderness. This expectation becomes part of the concealment. If an observer believes complex societies could not thrive in a dense tropical forest, then every subtle feature is more easily explained away. A straight ridge becomes a coincidence. Dark soil becomes natural variation. A mound becomes erosion. A pattern of useful trees becomes botanical accident. The jungle hides the past physically, but assumptions hide it intellectually. What survives in the record suggests that earlier models underestimated the capacity of ancient tropical communities to manage landscapes, sustain populations, and build organized worlds without leaving behind the kind of stone monuments that dominate popular imagination. There are exceptions, of course. Some jungle societies did leave stone cities, towering temples, carved monuments, and visible architecture that astonished later visitors. But the society hidden beneath this story is more elusive because its signature lies in forms that merge with vegetation. Its loss is not the romantic image of a golden city swallowed overnight. It is a longer, stranger process. Structures made for living become food for roots. Roads become ridges. Fields become forest. Reservoirs become wetlands. Orchards become wild abundance. Human earth becomes natural topography. The boundary between ruin and ecosystem dissolves. The return of nature also protects parts of the past. Canopy cover can slow certain kinds of erosion. Soil accumulation can seal fragile layers. Roots can damage structures, but vegetation can also hold mounds in place. Isolation can keep later construction from destroying ancient features. A buried society may survive precisely because it became hard to see. The jungle is not a museum, and it is not gentle, but it is capable of concealment so complete that entire landscapes can wait for centuries with their outlines intact beneath leaves. This is why rediscovery can feel sudden even when nothing has moved. The ruins were present all along. Human perception had not caught up with them. By the time modern investigation approaches, the old city or settlement is no longer a city in any ordinary sense. It is a forest with a memory problem. Its roads do not invite walking. Its mounds do not announce their makers. Its canals do not carry organized water. Its central spaces do not gather crowds. Yet beneath the green surface the arrangement remains. The earth still rises where people lifted it. The soil still darkens where they cooked and discarded and enriched. The plants still grow differently where they once planted, burned and tended. The hidden society has become part of the jungle's body. This is the long aftermath of disappearance. It is not emptiness. It is replacement, absorption and preservation at once. The society's most visible life fades, but its physical decisions continue to shape water, soil, roots and animal movement. The jungle has taken the city, but not erased it entirely. It has covered the evidence with such abundance that only those willing to look beneath abundance can see the old design. And in that covered design lies the next transformation of the story, because the lost society will not return through legend first. It will return through patterns seen from above, through instruments that can read the ground under leaves, and through the unsettling realization that what looked like wilderness may have been a human landscape waiting silently in green. Rediscovery begins with a strange reversal. For centuries the jungle hides the society by overwhelming the human eye from the ground, but from above, under the right conditions, the forest begins to betray itself. A line of trees grows slightly differently where an old causeway lifts the soil. A shadow falls along a ditch that no one has cleared in generations. A cluster of low mounds makes a pattern too regular to be natural. A clearing, a ridge, a wet hollow, a change in canopy height, a repeated shape across several kilometers. Each detail is small, but together they suggest that the land has been arranged. The lost society returns first not as a legend but as geometry. The earliest rediscoveries may not come from aircraft or satellites at all. They may come from local farmers, hunters, fishers, indigenous communities, rubber tappers, forest workers or travellers who notice pottery after rain, old mounds under trees, dark earth in certain places, or straight ridges running through vegetation. These observations are often older than formal archaeology. In many parts of the world, people living near ancient sites have long known that the land contains traces of earlier inhabitants. The problem is that outside scholars and officials have not always listened carefully, and sometimes they treated local knowledge as rumour until instruments confirmed what people on the ground already understood. What survives in the record suggests that rediscovery is often less about finding something unknown to everyone, and more about learning to respect different ways of knowing a landscape. Still, modern aerial methods transform the scale of the mystery. A person walking through dense forest can see only a few meters in many directions. The body becomes trapped inside green walls. Heat insects, mud roots, and uneven ground break concentration. A mound may be crossed without being recognized because it rises too gently beneath leaves. From above, however, patterns begin to connect. Airplanes, drones, satellite imagery, and especially LiDAR-like laser scanning can reveal the shape of the ground beneath vegetation with astonishing clarity. By sending pulses of light toward the Earth and measuring their return, such scanning can produce models of terrain that strip away much of the canopy digitally. The forest remains standing, but the map sees through it. The first clear image of a hidden landscape can feel almost impossible. What seemed like continuous jungle becomes a terrain of platforms, embankments, ditches, canals, reservoirs, roads, terraces and settlement clusters. Features that took decades to identify on foot appear in relation to one another all at once. A mound is no longer isolated. It belongs to a group. A group sits beside a path. The path connects to another cluster. The clusters surround waterworks. The waterworks relate to fields. Suddenly, the buried society is not a romantic rumour or a few scattered ruins. It is a planned human landscape, wider and more complicated than the eye can hold from the ground. This kind of rediscovery does not solve everything. It changes the questions. Aerial scanning can show shape, height, distribution and relationship, but it cannot automatically say who built the features exactly when they were built, how they were used, what language people spoke, how they governed themselves, or why they left. A mound on a terrain model is still a question until excavation dating soil analysis, artifact study and comparison with other sites give it context. The evidence remains incomplete because even the most advanced scan reads form more easily than meaning. It can reveal that a hidden city or settlement existed, but not everything that existence felt like from inside. The excitement of seeing through the canopy also carries risk. Patterns are seductive. The human mind is excellent at finding order, sometimes too excellent. A straight line may be ancient construction, but it may also be a modern track, a natural levee, a logging scar, or an artifact of data processing. A mound may be human-made or partly natural and later modified. A cluster may represent one period or several different phases layered together. Responsible researchers must test what images suggest. They walk, dig, sample, date, and compare. No single image fully accounts for a society. A beautiful map can begin a story, but the soil still has to answer. When investigators enter the forest after seeing these patterns from above, the experience can be disorienting. On the map, the causeway is clear. On the ground, it is a wet rise under leaves crossed by roots and shadow. On the map, a plaza has a shape. On the ground, it is a stand of trees with uneven soil and insects rising from the leaf litter. On the map, a ditch forms part of a system. On the ground, it is a shallow depression full of plants. The contrast reveals why the society stayed hidden for so long. Its remains are real, but they require translation between scales. The air sees pattern. The hand finds evidence. The mind must bring them together without forcing certainty where certainty does not belong. Excavation gives the aerial shapes human depth. A trench cut into a mound may reveal layers of construction, repair, abandonment, and reuse. Soil color changes show where surfaces were prepared or where organic matter accumulated. Charcoal provides material for dating. Pottery fragments identify activity and cultural tradition. Post holes show where wooden structures once stood. Seeds, starches, phytoliths, or pollen suggest diet and vegetation. A ditch may contain sediment showing whether it carried water, stood open, filled slowly, or was deliberately backfilled. Each feature becomes less abstract. It is no longer only a line on a screen. It is labor season tool marks, meals, fires, and decisions. The surprising detail is that some of the most important discoveries may be nearly invisible even during excavation. A buried floor may be recognized by a slight change in compaction. A garden zone may appear through microscopic plant remains rather than through obvious tools. A managed forest may be inferred through tree distribution, soil chemistry, and long-term ecological patterning. A political center may reveal itself not through palaces, but through the arrangement of ordinary households around shared spaces. This is archaeology at the edge of visibility. It depends on noticing the faint difference between natural darkness and human darkened soil, between erosion and deliberate embankment, between a random scatter and repeated activity. Rediscovery also forces a change in imagination. The old picture of the jungle as an untouched wilderness begins to fracture. The forest is still magnificent, still alive, still worthy of protection in its own right, but it is not always outside history. In some places it is a palimpsest, a surface written over many times by climate plants, animals and people. Ancient roads may lie under roots. Old fields may support modern trees. Former reservoirs may be wetlands. Sacred spaces may become groves. This does not make the forest artificial in a simple sense. It makes it historical. The boundary between nature and culture becomes much less clean than outsiders once believed. For descendant and local communities, rediscovery can carry mixed emotions. It may confirm long-held knowledge, strengthen claims of deep connection, and reveal the sophistication of ancestors whose histories were dismissed. It can also bring danger: outsiders, tourism, looting land disputes, political attention, and new pressures on places that have remained protected partly because they were difficult to see. The uncovering of a hidden society is not only a scientific event, it is also an ethical one. Who gets to interpret the ruins, who protects them, who benefits from them, and who is harmed when secret places become famous, are questions that cannot be avoided. Scholars still debate the best ways to balance research, conservation, and the rights of living communities connected to these landscapes. The rediscovered society often grows larger after each survey. What began as a few mounds becomes a settlement cluster. The cluster becomes part of a network. The network connects to fields, roads, waterworks, and neighbouring sites. The map expands, and with it the sense of human ambition under the canopy. Yet scale should be handled carefully. Popular accounts often leap from discovery to exaggeration, turning every hidden earthwork into a lost metropolis, or every road into evidence of an empire. The real story is powerful enough without that. A modest but organised society that transformed a tropical landscape over generations is already remarkable. A wide network of settlements linked by water ritual exchange and ecological knowledge can change historical understanding without needing impossible claims. Rediscovery from above also restores time to the landscape. The forest no longer appears as a single eternal present, it becomes layered. There is the living canopy of today, the abandonment centuries before the crisis, before the height of settlement, the first earthworks, the early gardens, the first arrivals, and the older land beneath them all. A laser map does not show these layers directly, but it makes them imaginable. It allows the mind to see that beneath every visible tree may lie another history, and beneath that history, another arrangement of water, soil, and human choice. By this point, the lost society hidden beneath the jungle is no longer hidden in the same way. It has not fully returned, but its outline has broken the surface of modern knowledge. It appears in digital terrain, excavation notes, pottery drawings, soil samples, plant surveys, and the remembered knowledge of people who knew the land before it became a headline. The green silence remains, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with structures too low for the eye patterns, too large for the walker, and evidence too fragile for careless certainty. The jungle once concealed the society by covering it with life. Modern discovery begins to uncover it by learning that life itself may be part of the clue. Once the hidden society begins to reappear, explanations gather around it like vines around an old wall. Some are careful, built slowly from soil dates, tools, plants, water systems, and settlement patterns. Others grow faster because mystery invites speed. A lost society beneath the jungle is exactly the kind of subject that attracts grand claims, vanished empires, secret technologies, outsiders from across oceans, sacred maps, forgotten races, impossible engineering, or sudden catastrophes, so dramatic that they leave little room for ordinary human resilience. These stories can be tempting because they make the ruins feel simple. They give the silence a single cause and the builders a single identity. But the real evidence points towards something more complicated and in many ways more impressive. The mainstream explanation begins with adaptation rather than impossibility. People living in tropical forests develop forms of settlement and land management suited to local conditions. They build with earthwood, fiber clay, and living vegetation because those materials are available and practical. They manage water because water controls movement, farming, health, and survival. They create raised platforms, causeways, canals, dark soils, garden forests, and settlement clusters because these features solve problems that the environment presents. Over time, these solutions can create landscapes far more organized than outsiders once expected. What survives in the record suggests intelligence rooted in place, not technology beyond explanation. One of the older mistaken explanations is that tropical forests are too hostile to support complex societies. This view treated dense vegetation, heavy rain, poor soil, and disease as permanent limits. It imagined that people in such regions could only live in scattered, simple communities unless influence from outside. The evidence now challenges that assumption. In many tropical landscapes, people learn to use river systems, wetland resources, mixed gardens, tree crops, soil, enrichment, controlled burning and seasonal movement to sustain larger and more organized populations than earlier models allowed. Scholars still debate the exact population sizes, political forms, and regional differences, but the old picture of empty wilderness has become impossible to defend in a simple way. At the opposite extreme is another mistake turning every hidden feature into proof of a massive lost empire. This happens easily when aerial scanning reveals thousands of earthworks or roads beneath canopy. The scale feels shocking, and shock becomes exaggeration. A network of settlements becomes an empire. A ceremonial centre becomes a capital, a raised path becomes a highway system, a water management landscape becomes evidence of centralised rule across vast distances. Sometimes large and highly organised societies did exist beneath tropical forests. In other cases, the evidence may point instead to distributed communities, linked villages, ritual landscapes, seasonal centres, federations, or shifting alliances. No single explanation fully accounts for every site. Complexity does not always mean empire, and planning does not always mean kings. Popular myths often search for outsiders to explain what local people built. This is an old habit in archaeology, and one of its most damaging. When ruins appear impressive, some observers assume that indigenous or local communities could not have created them without help from some distant civilization. The supposed helpers change with fashion migrants from another continent, survivors of a lost island, ancient sailors, or even more unsupported ideas. These claims often say less about the past than about modern prejudice. They ignore the long record of local innovation, ecological knowledge, and gradual development. They also treat the people most connected to the landscape as background figures in their own history. The evidence does not require such explanations. It shows human beings solving human problems with skill, patience, and inherited knowledge. Another disputed claim is the idea of sudden catastrophic burial. A jungle society can seem as though it vanished overnight because its remains are hidden so completely. But concealment by vegetation is not the same as instant destruction. In many cases, abandonment is gradual with continued visitation, partial occupation, reuse, migration, or transformation. Floods, droughts, fires, conflicts, epidemics, and political crises may all play roles, but they rarely create a perfect single ending. A dramatic disaster may occur in one place and still not explain an entire region. The evidence remains incomplete, and there are sites where abrupt events matter, but the broader story usually resists the clean satisfaction of one final day. Climate explanations are powerful because they connect human history to measurable environmental change. Sediment cores pollen records cave deposits, lake levels, and other climate archives can reveal droughts, flood cycles, vegetation shifts, or periods of instability. It is reasonable to ask whether such changes strained food production, water systems, and political authority. Yet climate alone can become too simple if treated as destiny. People adapt to environmental stress in many ways. Some societies survive drought by changing crops, moving settlements, deepening reservoirs, expanding trade, or reorganizing labor. Others collapse under similar pressures because social systems, leadership, conflict, disease, or inequality make adaptation harder. Climate may set the stage, but human choices decide much of the performance. Social explanations focus on the internal structure of the society hierarchy. Labor demands ritual authority, conflict, debt, population pressure, and competition over land or water. These explanations help because they treat collapse as a human process rather than a weather report. A canal fails not only because rain changes, but because people stop maintaining it. A central plaza empties not only because crops fail, but because the gatherings that once gave it meaning no longer hold people together. A leader loses power not only because drought arrives, but because followers no longer trust that leadership can protect them. Still, social explanations also have limits. Without environmental stress, some tensions may remain manageable. Without external pressures, political systems may reform rather than break. The hidden society's disappearance likely belongs to the difficult space where ecological and social problems intensify one another. Disease deserves caution. Epidemics can transform societies with terrible speed, and in later periods introduced diseases devastated many indigenous populations in tropical regions and far beyond them. It would be irresponsible to ignore that history. But for earlier phases of hidden jungle societies, disease often leaves indirect or uncertain evidence. Poor preservation of human remains makes diagnosis difficult. Settlement decline may be caused by many factors. Later population losses may obscure earlier patterns. Disease may have been decisive in some contexts, secondary in others, and absent as a major factor elsewhere. A careful narrator must hold the possibility without using it as a universal answer. Conflict is similarly difficult. Defensive earthworks, burned layers, trauma on bones, weapons, or settlement movement can suggest violence, yet many signs are ambiguous. Ditches can drain water or mark boundaries as well as defend. Fires can be accidental or ritual. Weapons can be tools. A fortified settlement may reflect fear, actual attack, social display, or all of these together. Scholars still debate the role of warfare in many ancient tropical landscapes. The safest conclusion is neither to romanticize these societies as peaceful forest utopias, nor to turn them into arenas of constant violence. They were human communities capable of cooperation and conflict alliance, and rivalry, generosity, and coercion. There is also the question of political form. When researchers find organized landscapes, they naturally ask who ordered the work. Was there a ruling elite, a council of lineages, ritual specialists, seasonal gatherings, household cooperation, coercion, shared belief? The evidence may support several possibilities at once. A large mound could suggest elite authority, but it could also represent communal labor over many generations. A causeway linking settlements could be imposed from a center, or built through negotiated cooperation among groups. Standardized pottery might indicate shared identity, trade influence, or political integration. The ruins withhold easy answers because social life does not fossilize as clearly as pottery does. The most responsible interpretation is often a layered one. The hidden society likely rises through generations of ecological knowledge settlement, growth, social cooperation, and landscape modification. It reaches a level of organization that is visible in earthworks, soils, roots, and domestic remains. It faces pressures that may include climate instability, resource stress, population growth, political tension, shifting trade disease and conflict. It does not simply vanish, but reorganizes, disperses, declines, or becomes absorbed into later communities and forests. Some areas are abandoned, others continue. Some traditions survive, others break. What looks like disappearance from a modern archaeological perspective may have been lived as movement, loss, adaptation, and memory. This layered explanation may seem less dramatic than a single lost empire or sudden doom, but it is closer to how societies actually change. Civilizations are not machines that stop when one part breaks. They are living arrangements made of food, authority, belief, labor, kinship, landscape, and memory. They can bend for a long time before breaking. They can lose centers while preserving people. They can abandon monuments while carrying stories elsewhere. They can disappear from maps and continue in forests, fields, languages, and descendants. The jungle society's mystery is not weakened by refusing unsupported theories. It becomes stronger because the real human achievement is no longer hidden beneath fantasy. In the end, competing explanations reveal as much about modern imagination as about the ancient past. Some people want the ruins to prove that history is full of impossible secrets. Others want them to fit neatly into familiar models of rise and fall. The evidence resists both desires. It shows a society deeply tied to its environment, capable of planning, vulnerable to change, and difficult to classify. It asks for humility. It asks observers to admit that civilization can be made of earth instead of marble, of managed forest, instead of empty wilderness of roots beneath leaves, instead of roads across open plains. The lost society hidden beneath the jungle does not need to be impossible to be astonishing. It only needs to be seen clearly enough and carefully enough for its real complexity to emerge from the green. Even after the maps sharpen and the soil begins to speak, the ruins still withhold more than they reveal. This is the difficult truth at the center of the hidden society. Discovery does not end the mystery. It changes its shape. A mound can be measured. A canal can be traced. Pottery can be sorted. Charcoal can be dated. Ancient soils can be tested. Yet the questions that make a society feel alive often remain beyond reach. What did the people call themselves? How did they describe the forest around them? Which ancestors mattered most? Which stories explain the first settlement, the first flood, the first clearing, the first death, the first oath of leadership? Archaeology can move close to these things, but often it cannot enter them fully. The evidence remains incomplete, and in that incompleteness the society keeps part of itself. Identity is one of the hardest absences. Later observers may name the society after a river, a region, a site, a pottery style, or a modern research label, but such names are often conveniences rather than recovered truths. The people themselves may have used names tied to clans, landscapes, ancestors, language groups, ritual affiliations, or political relationships that changed over time. A settlement cluster that looks unified on a map may have contained several communities with different identities. A shared pottery style may not mean a single people. A single earthwork tradition may spread across groups who cooperate, compete, marry, imitate, or borrow from one another. What survives in the record suggests connection, but connection is not the same as sameness. Language is even more elusive. If the society leaves no durable writing, or if any writing was made on perishable materials, its words may be gone. Place names may vanish or survive only in altered forms. Songs, prayers, jokes, warnings, insults, laws, and stories disappear unless carried through descendants. or recorded later under conditions that may distort them. This silence matters because language holds categories of thought that artifacts cannot easily replace. A pot can show style and use, but not the words spoken for the clay. A canal can show water management, but not the ritual phrase used when it was opened. A burial can show treatment of the dead, but not the name by which the dead were called. The hidden society becomes visible in action and invisible in speech. Political organization remains uncertain as well. The landscape may show planning, but planning can arise in many ways. A powerful ruler might command labor from a central place. A council of elders might coordinate work through kinship obligations. Ritual specialists might gather people for construction tied to seasonal ceremonies. Independent villages might cooperate because canals, causeways, and exchange routes benefit all of them. Leadership might be strong in some generations and weak in others. It might be inherited, achieved, contested, temporary, or tied to control of sacred knowledge rather than force. No single explanation fully accounts for the range of possibilities. The ruins show that people work together, but they do not always reveal how agreement was produced or what happened when agreement failed. Population size is another tempting but uncertain question. Aerial maps can make a landscape look crowded with features, and popular accounts often turn that impression into bold numbers. Yet estimating population requires caution. Not every mound is occupied at the same time. Not every platform holds the same number of people. Some spaces may be seasonal, ceremonial, agricultural, or reused across centuries. A large settlement zone may represent long accumulation rather than one dense moment. On the other hand, older assumptions may have underestimated population because they fail to recognize buried features and managed landscapes. Scholars still debate numbers in many tropical regions, and the safest answer often lies between extremes. The society may have been larger and more organized than once believed, without needing to become an imagined megacity in every retelling. Ritual meaning is perhaps the most haunting uncertainty. Archaeologists can identify places where unusual deposits occur, where objects are arranged deliberately, where structures differ from domestic spaces, where burials receive special treatment, or where construction appears to follow repeated patterns. But ritual is not only behavior, it is belief, fear, gratitude, obligation, memory, performance, and social order. A broken vessel placed in a pit may be an offering, a closure act, a feast remnant, or something else entirely. A mound may be sacred because of ancestors' celestial events, political power, origin stories, or the simple fact that generations have gathered there. Claims about exact meanings must be made carefully. The evidence can suggest that a place mattered. It cannot always tell why. The same caution applies to alignments. Human beings often build with attention to directions, horizons, water, sun stars prevailing, winds, sacred landmarks, or social pathways. Some ancient structures in the world clearly reflect astronomical knowledge, but not every straight line beneath the jungle points to the heavens, and not every orientation carries cosmic significance. A causeway may run straight because the ground allows it. A plaza may align with a riverbank, a slope, a neighboring mound, or a practical route. The desire to find hidden astronomical codes can outrun the evidence. What survives in the record suggests that the society had rich spatial meaning, but the exact logic of that meaning may remain partly closed. Daily emotion is almost completely beyond direct recovery. The ruins do not say who was afraid during the bad rains, who resented labor demands, who loved the sound of evening insects, who felt pride standing on a newly raised platform, who secretly wanted to leave, who mourned a child who feared a rival settlement, who believed the old ceremonies still worked, who doubted them. Archaeology can infer stress from diet trauma, settlement change, or environmental pressure, but lived feeling does not preserve like charcoal. This absence should not make the people seem distant or flat. It should do the opposite. It should remind the listener that every mound once held private worlds as complex as any present life, most of them lost not because they were unimportant, but because time is careless with the intimate. There are also chronological shadows. A site may contain many centuries of activity compressed into layers that are difficult to separate. People rebuild on older surfaces. Later residents dig into earlier deposits. Roots disturb stratigraphy. Floods move materials. Animals mix layers. Looting and erosion remove context. A radiocarbon date may tell when a piece of charcoal stopped being living wood, but not always the exact moment a structure was built or abandoned. Pottery styles help, but they can remain in use for long periods or be traded between groups. The hidden society may appear as a sequence of phases, but those phases are modern attempts to organize a past that was experienced as continuous change. The society's ending is still one of the deepest uncertainties. Environmental stress, internal tension, conflict disease, migration, trade, disruption, and political change all remain possible, and more than one may be true. Some areas may decline while others persist. Some communities may abandon central sites while maintaining nearby gardens. Some people may move far away while others remain close enough to visit old mounds. Some traditions may break suddenly, while others continue quietly in descendant communities. The record may show reduced occupation, but not whether people left in fear, hope exhaustion strategy, or obedience to a decision made by leaders or elders. The vanishing moment, already difficult to define, becomes even harder to explain from the soil alone. Modern discovery creates its own uncertainties. Aerial scanning can reveal features, but vegetation, data resolution, erosion, and interpretation affect what is seen. Excavation samples only a tiny fraction of a site, and each trench is a narrow window. Conservation concerns may rightly prevent digging in some places. Political boundaries, funding limits, weather access, and ethical responsibilities all shape what can be studied. Some ruins remain hidden because no survey has reached them. Others are known locally but not published. Others may be destroyed before they are documented. The map of the hidden society is therefore not only ancient, it is also modern, shaped by the uneven history of research. There is another problem. The more famous a lost jungle society becomes, the more its mystery can be distorted. Popular retellings often prefer certainty, drama, and scale. They may simplify a network of communities into a single lost city. They may describe gradual transformation as sudden disappearance. They may ignore descendant peoples to make the ruins seem more isolated and mysterious. They may turn careful archaeological debate into a contest between official history and forbidden truth. This does a quiet harm. It replaces genuine uncertainty with manufactured secrecy. The real gaps in the record are profound enough. They do not need to be filled with unsupported claims. The ruins withhold, but they do not refuse entirely. They reveal labor. They reveal adaptation. They reveal a relationship with water, soil, trees, and movement. They reveal that people built order in a place later mistaken for untouched wilderness. They reveal that civilization can be made from perishable materials and still shape land for centuries. They reveal that disappearance is often a matter of perspective, because a society may leave one form and continue in another. They reveal enough to correct old assumptions, but not enough to make the people fully recoverable. This balance is what gives the story its gravity. Standing in the forest, the unanswered questions do not feel like failures. They feel like distance. A mound rises under roots. A shard lies in the dark soil. A line of ground runs toward trees. The instruments can measure the trench, can expose the sample, can date, but the society remains partly beyond possession. Its people are not characters waiting to be completed by modern imagination. They were real, and reality includes what cannot be known. The hidden society beneath the jungle comes closer through evidence, yet keeps its last interior rooms closed. In that silence there is frustration, but also respect. Some parts of the past survive as facts, others survive as edges, shadows, and the knowledge that human worlds are always larger than the traces they leave behind. The hidden society does not end at the edge of its ruins. Its traces move outward into living landscapes, into forests that still carry old choices, into communities whose histories are deeper than written records, and into the uncomfortable realization that disappearance is not always the same as absence. A mound beneath trees may look abandoned, but the land around it may still be shaped by ancient planting old paths, inherited knowledge, and the quiet persistence of useful species. A river landing may no longer serve the same settlement, yet people may still choose that bend because water, soil, fish and movement continue to make it valuable. Time changes the form of human presence, but it does not always remove it. Sometimes history survives by becoming difficult to separate from nature. This is one of the most important lessons of the jungle. Forests are not always outside human memory. In many tropical regions, the distribution of fruit trees, palms, nut-bearing species, medicinal plants and enriched soils suggests long relationships between people and vegetation. Some trees may have been planted deliberately. Others may have been protected when surrounding forest was cleared. Others may have spread because people carried seeds, discarded fruit remains near houses, or encouraged plants that served food, medicine, construction, fiber oil, or ritual needs. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every useful plant cluster is proof of ancient management, but the pattern is too important to ignore. The forest can be wild and historical at the same time. A person walking through such a landscape centuries later might think of it as untouched, because the builders are gone, and the houses have decayed. Yet underfoot there may be dark earth created by generations of cooking, burning, gardening and disposal. Around the path there may be trees descended from old orchards. Beneath a stand of vegetation there may be a platform where a family once slept above wet ground. The jungle does not preserve human memory like a written archive. It preserves it through growth, soil, chemistry, drainage, species distribution, and local habit. To read that archive requires humility, because the signs are not always clear, and because nature and culture are woven together rather than stacked in separate layers. Descendant communities are central to this story, even when the archaeological record cannot draw a perfect line from an ancient site to a modern people. In many regions, indigenous and local communities maintain knowledge of plants, soils, waterways, seasonal cycles, old mounds, ancestral places and paths that outsiders may only recently have mapped. Their knowledge is not a decorative addition to scientific research. It can be a form of historical evidence, ecological expertise, and ethical guidance. Scholars still debate specific connections in many cases, and not every modern group can or should be simplistically assigned to a particular ruin. But the older habit of treating jungle ruins as belonging only to a vanished people with no living relationships around them has done lasting damage. The idea of a lost society can accidentally erase survival. When a place is described as abandoned, vanished, or forgotten, the words may be archaeologically useful, but they can also imply that the people disappeared completely. Sometimes they did not. They moved. They reorganized. They married into other groups. They changed languages. They adopted new settlement patterns. They survived conquest, disease, forced labor missionization, enslavement, displacement, or later state violence in altered forms. Their descendants may not live in the old centre, but they may carry plant knowledge, food traditions, river routes, ritual memories, place names or stories whose deep roots are difficult to prove and impossible to dismiss casually. What survives in the record suggests discontinuity, but human continuity can be quieter than architecture. There is a painful layer here. Many tropical regions were reshaped not only by ancient environmental and social change, but by later colonial violence. Disease introduced from outside, forced relocation, warfare, extraction, slavery, mission settlements, and land seizure shattered communities and disrupted memory. In some places, this later catastrophe made older sites seem more mysterious, because the people who might have explained them were killed, displaced, or forced into silence. The jungle then became a screen onto which outsiders projected fantasies of empty land and lost worlds. No single explanation fully accounts for the silence around every ruin, but in many cases silence is not natural. It is historical. It was made. Recognizing living echoes changes the mood of rediscovery. The ruins are not simply puzzles for distant observers. They are part of inhabited landscapes where people still hunt, farm, gather, travel, worship, remember, and defend land. A buried causeway may cross territory that matters today. A mound may stand near a village. A dark soil patch may support crops. A grove may provide food or medicine. Archaeological attention can bring pride, protection, and recognition, but it can also bring looters, outsiders, restrictions, tourism pressure, or political conflict. The past is not harmless once it becomes valuable. It can be used to support land rights or to threaten them. It can honour living communities or turn their ancestors into museum objects while ignoring present struggles. The forest itself becomes a kind of descendant, though not in a human sense. It carries consequences of ancient decisions without needing to remember them. A tree species favoured by past cultivators continues to fruit. A wetland formed from an old reservoir attracts birds and fish. A raised mound supports different routes from lower ground. An old path becomes an animal corridor. These echoes are not sentimental, they are ecological. Human action enters soil water, and species relationships then persists after human intention fades. In this way, the hidden society becomes part of the jungle's present life. It is not only under the forest, it is within the forest. This complicates the modern idea of conservation. Protecting a jungle landscape often means protecting biodiversity, carbon storage, watersheds, endangered species, and climate stability. But it may also mean protecting cultural history embedded in the forest itself. A place can be both ecological treasure and archaeological archive. Cutting it may destroy not only habitat but ancient mounds, soils, canals, and plant communities shaped by people over centuries. Burning it may erase evidence that has survived abandonment, weather, and time. Mining roads, industrial agriculture, and illegal excavation can destroy in a few days what the jungle preserved for 1,000 years. The hidden society is fragile not because it vanished, but because what remains is often low, subtle, and easy to mistake for ordinary ground. There is also a surprising kind of hope in these living landscapes. They show that ancient societies were not always enemies of forests. Some transformed their environments destructively, and some may have contributed to local degradation. Human land use is never innocent by default. Yet many communities also developed forms of management that maintained productivity without turning the entire forest into open field. Garden forests, enriched soils, controlled burns, mixed cropping, wetland use, and protection of useful species suggest forms of ecological knowledge that modern societies are only beginning to understand with proper respect. The evidence remains incomplete, and ancient practices cannot be copied blindly into the present, but they challenge the idea that the only choices are untouched wilderness or total destruction. The living echoes also ask for a different definition of civilization. If civilization is measured only by stone monuments, royal inscriptions and visible ruins, then the jungle society remains half hidden. If civilization includes sustained knowledge, land management, social organization, ecological adaptation, trade ritual memory, and the ability to create durable relationships between people and place, then the hidden society becomes much harder to dismiss. Its legacy is not a palace, it is a landscape. It is a forest that may still grow from ancient decisions. It is soil that still feeds roots because people once fed the soil. It is a pattern of settlement that teaches modern observers to look again at what they thought was empty. For listeners far from the jungle, this may seem remote, but the lesson is broad. Human beings often live inside landscapes shaped by forgotten hands. Fields follow old boundaries, roads trace older paths, cities grow over buried settlements, forests stand where orchards once stood. Rivers move past places whose names have changed many times. The difference in the jungle is that life covers the evidence so completely that forgetting feels natural, but forgetting is not proof that nothing happened. It is only proof that memory needs material support, and material support can rot, burn, move, or grow leaves. By following the echoes, the hidden society becomes less like a vanished object and more like a transformation. Its houses are gone, but some of its plants may remain. Its central spaces are quiet, but its earthworks still guide water. Its people no longer gather in the same plazas, but descendants or neighbouring communities may still know the land in ways that carry deep histories. Its name may be lost, but its influence persists in roots, soils, roots, and survival. The jungle does not merely cover the past, it continues it in altered form. This is why the story cannot end with rediscovery alone. To find the ruins is not simply to uncover a dead society. It is to enter a living landscape where ancient labour, natural regeneration, modern communities, scientific study and political responsibility meet. The old settlement beneath the leaves is silent, but the world around it is not. Birds call from trees that may descend from ancient groves. Water gathers in depressions that may once have been managed. People still move through the forest with knowledge that no aerial scan can replace. Beneath the green life, the lost society leaves more than remains. It leaves a warning against easy absence and a reminder that some histories survive not by standing above the earth, but by growing through it. The fragility of the hidden society lies not in weakness, but in the kind of strength it chooses. It builds with materials that breathe, bend, rot, and return to the soil. It feeds itself through 1,000 small relationships with water trees, fish roots, fire, clay, and seasonal memory. It organizes land without always carving its story into stone. It survives by adapting closely to the forest, so closely that when its people leave, the forest can inherit almost everything and make the inheritance look natural. This is what makes the society so difficult to see and so important to understand. Its disappearance is not a simple failure. It is a reminder that the most successful human arrangements can still become invisible when the conditions that support them change. From a distance, the story may seem to follow the familiar shape of rise and fall. People enter a rich but demanding landscape. They learn its rhythms. They build settlements, raise mounds, manage water, enrich soils, create roots, gather in ceremonial spaces, exchange goods, and shape a human world beneath the canopy. Then pressure arrives. Rainfall shifts. Rivers behave differently. Soils demand more labour. Populations grow authority strains. Rituals become heavier. Trade falters. Conflict or disease may deepen the damage and the old center loses its hold. People move, houses decay, the jungle returns, centuries pass, instruments rediscover what eyes had missed. Yet the familiar shape hides a deeper truth. This society may not have ended as cleanly as the word collapse suggests. It may have dispersed, transformed, survived in fragments, or entered descendant landscapes in ways the record can only partly follow. That uncertainty matters. Too often vanished societies are treated as warnings with a single moral. They overused the land, they ignored climate, they fought too much. Their leaders failed, their rituals became costly, their trade networks broke, their environment betrayed them. Any of these may be partly true in particular places, and some may be strongly supported by evidence in specific cases. But no single explanation fully accounts for complex human disappearance. Societies are not held together by one pillar. They're held together by many, and collapse often comes when several begin to crack at once. The hidden society beneath the jungle teaches that fragility is cumulative. A bad flood is survivable. A failed harvest is survivable. Political tension is survivable. A damaged canal is survivable. But when each problem makes the next harder to solve, resilience begins to lose its power. There is a quiet humility in that lesson. The people who built this society were not foolish for living where they lived. They were not primitive because their architecture decayed. They were not mysterious because they lacked the kinds of monuments outsiders expected. They were skilled observers of one of the most complex environments on Earth. They understood water, soil, plants, movement, and repair with a depth that modern societies often underestimate. What survives in the records suggests patience, planning, flexibility, and memory. Their vulnerability does not cancel their intelligence. It places them fully within the human condition, where knowledge can be deep, and still not enough to control every future. The jungle itself becomes the final witness. It covers without entirely erasing. It destroys some evidence and protects other evidence. It turns plazas into groves, roads into ridges, ditches into wet hollows, platforms into hills, gardens into forest and settlements, into patterns that wait for a different kind of vision. In doing so, it challenges the way history is usually imagined. The past is often pictured as something behind glass, preserved in dry stone, written in archives, arranged in museums. Here the past is damp, alive, unstable, and full of roots. It does not sit apart from nature, it grows inside it. To study such a past is to accept that history can be green-breathing and difficult to separate from the present. This changes what disappearance means. A society can vanish from ordinary sight and still influence the world that follows. Its soils can remain fertile, its useful trees can continue to fruit, its waterworks can guide drainage, its roots can shape later movement. Its memory can survive in descendant knowledge, local stories place names, ritual associations, or simply in the practical choice to live near the same rivers and rises. The evidence remains incomplete, and it would be careless to claim continuity where it cannot be shown. But it would be equally careless to assume that silence means total extinction. Human history is filled with transformations mistaken for endings because the surviving evidence changed form. The hidden society also warns against the arrogance of first impressions. A forest may look untouched because the signs of touch have become subtle. A mound may look natural because time has softened its edges. A people may seem forgotten because their records were not made in a form that survived. A landscape may be called empty because outsiders do not know how to read it. The rediscovery of buried settlements beneath jungle can therefore become more than an archaeological surprise. It becomes a correction. It asks modern observers to look again, to question the difference between wilderness and history, to listen more carefully to local knowledge, and to recognize that complexity does not always announce itself with towers. At the same time, the story should not become a simple celebration of harmony. Ancient people were capable of wisdom and damaged cooperation, and violent sustainability and overreach. The hidden society may have managed parts of its environment beautifully, and it may also have strained them. It may have built systems of support, and it may have created inequality. It may have preserved knowledge, and it may have demanded too much labor from some of its members. The past does not become noble by being lost. It becomes meaningful by being real. Its people deserve neither romantic perfection nor dismissal. They deserve the more difficult respect of being understood as fully human. Near the end of the story, the strongest image is not a golden city swallowed whole, because that image is too easy. The stronger image is a low rise beneath trees almost invisible, holding the remains of a house floor, a cooking fire, a child's broken pot, a post hole, a scattering of seeds, a layer of soil made darker by generations of hands. Around it the forest grows with confidence. Rain falls on leaves. Roots move through the old surface. Animals pass without ceremony. Nothing about the place declares that a society once organized labor, belief, food, and memory here. Yet it did. The proof is quiet, but quiet proof is still proof. This is why the lost society hidden beneath the jungle lingers in the mind. It reveals how much of human history may be present without being obvious. It shows that landscapes can remember even when people forget. It shows that collapse may be a process of movement as much as destruction. It shows that civilization can be built in forms that vanish beautifully and dangerously into life. And it leaves behind a final contradiction that cannot be resolved neatly. The jungle seems to have taken everything. But the deeper one looks, the more it becomes clear that everything was never fully gone. The forest stands above the old world, green-layered and restless. Beneath it, earthworks still rise by a few careful degrees. Dark soils still hold charcoal. Pottery still waits in broken pieces. Water still follows old decisions. Trees still root in places once opened by human hands. The society has lost its roofs, its voices, its ceremonies, its ordinary mornings, and perhaps even its name. But it has not lost all presence. It remains beneath green life as a pattern, a warning and a memory without a tongue. Its fragility is the fragility of all human worlds. They can feel permanent, while they are maintained and become invisible when maintenance ends. Yet even invisibility is not nothing. Sometimes it is simply the form survival takes when time, forest, and silence agree to cover the past without completely letting it go. Long after the last path closes, the jungle keeps breathing. Rain falls through the canopy in slow silver threads, touching leaves, bark, roots, and the softened ground where people once walked with purpose. The old settlement no longer holds its shape for the eye. Its houses are gone. Its fires are cold. Its voices have moved beyond recovery. Yet beneath the green surface, the land still carries the weight of what happened there. A mound remains slightly higher than the forest floor. A buried channel still gathers water after storms. A shard of pottery rests in darkness, not as treasure, but as the quiet remainder of a hand, a meal, a household, a day. The society hidden beneath the jungle does not return as a complete answer. It returns as a presence. It reminds the present that human worlds are built from labor. Repeated so often it begins to look permanent. Paths stay open because feet and hands keep them open. Fields remain fertile because knowledge is renewed. Ceremonies continue because people gather. Authority lasts because others still believe in it. Memory survives because someone carries it forward. When those acts weaken, even the strongest places can begin to fade, not always through fire or conquest, but through silence, distance, and the simple growth of living things. There is something gentle and unsettling in that. The forest is not cruel. It does not hate the abandoned city. It simply grows. It turns exposed floors into soil, old gardens into thickets, roads into ridges, and forgotten plazas into shade. It covers human ambition with leaves, not to erase it completely, but to fold it into a larger cycle. What was built becomes ground. What was ground becomes root. What was remembered becomes uncertain. And still, somewhere below the pattern remains. Perhaps that is the final image the lost society leaves behind, not a ruined tower, not a dramatic last day, not a single answer carved into stone, but a landscape where history sleeps beneath life. The jungle stands bright and restless above it, full of rain insects, birds, and green light. Under that life lies another life older and quieter, shaped by people who once believed their world would continue. Their names may be gone, but the land has not entirely forgotten them. It holds them softly in earth-water roots and shadow, waiting for someone to notice that even silence can have a shape.